And you join us back here for Radio Flange Goblet's continuing coronation coverage. We've been here since 4 this morning when the royals greeted the day with the traditional incineration of at least 2 human clown pyramids, all of whom happily gave of their lives for the event and sang risque sea shanties as they did so. You'll be glad to know that the little incident with the escaped ceremonial penguins and the discarded pile of korma is now under control with minimal loss of human life. And equally good news is that visiting celebrity Miley Cyrus has been shot in the leg at customs and won't be performing. Well done, the boys in blue. Our guest in the studio now is Ernst Truffle-Haddock, royal-appointed gentleman-in-waiting to soon-to-be controversial Queen Camilla's pet sparrow Janice. He has intimate knowledge of the royal court, routinely speaks with the monarch directly on the subject of tie length and cape maintenance, and once sat next to Giles Brandreth at a Tesco's car park and exchanged strained but erotically charged looks through their windows before speeding off into the night. Ernst, good day to you.
The proper greeting is good thighs and weld.
Thighs and weld?
Yes, as it's the Old English word for midday.
I don't think that's right.
Don't question me, scum. I once ate lunch in the same restaurant as Bobby Davro and never once accidentally soiled myself in excitement.
I feel like if you didn't soil yourself, it wouldn't be something you'd feel necessary to mention. I, for one, didn't think you would have soiled yourself in front of Bobby Davro.
Well, who wouldn't? Davro is a national treasure, one of our finest kept secrets, one of this sceptred isle's strangest and most wonderful of birds. Who wouldn't release their bowels in his presence?
So, you're saying you did then?
No?
Well, enough of this drivel. What can you tell us about the royal preparations that are happening right now? What goes into a day like today?
Well, I mean, it's pretty normal. I'm sure homes around England do the same thing. But the footmen will be polishing all generations of the family's feet. They use a special combination of lemon, rosehip, talcum powder, little gold shavings, and dock leaves. This will take some hours, as they will have to stop every 13 minutes for probably another orgy, or maybe even a break for tiffin. At around 10:42 a.m, King Charles will be presented with the ceremonial mouse necklace. This necklace features 17 freshly picked mice that have been lacquered in fig juices and spray-painted mauve. He has about 31.5 minutes to complain about the size and demand at least 3 more mice be attached, or he has to forfeit wearing his leopard print sock garters underneath his wax pantaloons. This tradition, of course, dates back to the Magna Carta and was reintroduced that time that the Queen Mother had to cover up the fact that she had playfully skinned and ate 48 cheesemongers in 1976. She was a character. The monarch will be wearing at least 5 separate pairs of undergarments, one of which has to be marinated in oils overnight. Cooking oils, that is. Oils used for preparing the royal dumplings. By which I mean tits. After everyone in the palace is at least partially clothed, they then spend the next 4 hours playing an excessively violent form of tiddlywinks, utilising whips, chains, a jaggedy pokey thing, some hand grenades, and a flamethrower. This is how the royal family have for centuries kept their numbers at a manageable level, you see. They breed like absolute rabbits with each other, and interestingly enough, this led to Her Royal Highness the 3rd Duchess of Windermere giving birth to what looked like a cross between a baby, a rabbit, and a kangaroo in 1848. That abomination is, of course, seen stuffed and set upon a large velveteen pillow at the exit of the Tower of London tour of its intricate drainage systems. Then, of course, the most exciting part of the pre-ceremony activities can take place. Once Charles has fed on whatever winged animals the gamekeepers found on the grounds, slathered in the usual creams and jellies, of course, they all gather around the hearth for the ancient ritual of listening to a podcast. past.
Oh, I see where this is going.
You can't possibly.
You're going to say the after-movie diner, aren't you?
No.
I bet you bleeding are.
Probably not.
Go on, admit it, you bastard.
Oh, I can't have any fun.
See, I was right.
Well, give yourself a medal then.
I will. And I'll take the last hobnob biscuit.
You complete and total bastard.
Yes, that's right. Back by popular demand. Well, back by a deafening silence that we took to be a reasonable demand that you were all just too polite to make. It's the inevitably nonsensical, yet hopefully enjoyable, After Movie Diner Season 2. That's right, the first 353 episodes were just Season 1. That is just mad! Like all good sequels, in Season 2, you can expect us to ramp up the action, gore, expletives, gratuitous mentions of Donald Pleasance, and, of course, the requisite nudity. So, when you hear this noise,
let's find each other tonight.
Remove your first item of clothing and make it something good, not just a sock or a polka dot neckerchief or something. In Season 2, your put-upon and rapidly aging host, John Cross, is going to attempt to write, shoot, edit, and score an independent film while talking with his guests about the arduous process and probably a movie or two for good measure. If you enjoy the show and have pursued the recommended treatment from your medical providers, why not support the show on Patreon over at patreon.com/aftermoviediner. You can also donate to the show directly at aftermoviediner.com. Rate and review the show wherever podcasts are found and rating and reviewing is possible. Even a 1-star review provides useful insights on exactly the sort of petty-minded and wretched individual who negatively reviews free entertainment they do not need to be consuming. So, without further dribbling, please put down your lemon meringues, silence your bowels, and rub 2 nearby dogs together for the one, the only. Thank goodness, because any more of him and we'd have to start a call. John Cross.
How you been, man? Good to talk to you.
I know, good to talk to you too. I know it's been a little bit since we've last chatted.
Yeah, and it's all good. I'm excited that we're bringing back Sleazy, Spader, Springtime, so that's going to be great.
Oh, it's Sleazy, Spader, Springtime. Welcome to the show. Oh, it's a Sleazy, Spader, Springtime. I want you all to know that if you please, there's James Spader Sleaze and it's got nowhere else to go. So loosen all your blouses, give your nose a damn good blow and resist the urge to flee. 'Cause after all, it's 2023. Sleazy Spider Springtime Show. Oh yeah, it is 2023. Sleazy Spider Springtime Show.
Yes.
I think people are going to love that.
Yeah.
I need to move my phone somewhere so that if it goes off, the vibrations won't cause insanity in the thing.
I'm pretty satisfied with.
Oh, and I'm definitely getting rid of my Apple Watch because it seems to talk to me whether I want it to or not.
Yes.
So I'm throwing that across the room. Seriously, I don't even have to. Like, what's hilarious is when I want my Apple Watch to work, and
Yeah.
I will sit there for 10 minutes being like, hey Siri, like fucking forever, and it won't work, right? And
Right.
then I can just be talking about anything, like not even something that sounds like that word. Just, I don't know, talking about sandwiches or something. And it'll be like, I can't find sandwiches. And it's like, because I wasn't asking you to fucking find sandwiches.
Yeah, that's the one thing. My wife and I, we don't have anything smart other than the smartphones. Like we don't have, Alexa or Siri. We don't have any of those kind of gadgets.
Right.
And I don't know. At some point, I imagine we're probably going to get there, whether we like it or not. But it's one of those things we're kind of blissfully happy not. But it is still one of those things where even if we don't have those things, it's like we'll be talking about, whatever we talk about, something stupid like watching Mad Men and like, oh, look at this, there's old Frosted Flakes box on that looks really cool, and then, you go to Instagram and suddenly you've got 5 ads for Frosted Flakes and it's like, okay, I don't know how that happened, but it's like,
well, I mean that happens as well. Like that's also ridiculous, and it's made even worse when you get the Apple Watch because it's on you at all times.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not just when you happen to have your phone there or when you have your phone open. Your watch is like listening to you the whole time. So I get all sorts of bizarre commercials where I'm like, I was just joking with my wife about this the other day. It doesn't mean that I want to purchase whatever the hell this is. But no, it's and listen, I'm someone who's I'm someone who, if given his complete druthers, right? Given his like no one else's influence in my life and it's just me and whatever, probably wouldn't have any of this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But then by the same token, probably wouldn't have ever done a podcast. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I wouldn't have a computer, I wouldn't have a mic. Like, do you know? I'd be living. But I feel like once they hook you in with one thing, then suddenly all other things become like an option, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just can't. Like we have it, and it's also so frustrating. So we have most of the main Apple products just because we were trying to stay. So we have the Apple TV, we have the Apple Watch, and we have the iPhones, right?
Yeah.
But then what ends up happening, we bought a house last year. In fact, we bought a house a year to the day on May 4th, right?
Wow. Was that wow?
Yeah, it's that recent. And what ends up happening, right, is, we had the electrician round and my wife wanted dimmers on the lights, and you're like, okay, well, you might as well just go for smart dimmers. And I'm like, what is smart dimmer? All right, smart dimmers, fine. We go smart dimmers, right? So they're by one company. Then you have like, well, I'm going to go buy a doorbell. You can't just buy a doorbell anymore. It has to be a smart doorbell. You're like, why is my doorbell to be smart? Well, your doorbell's smart. Okay, fine. But it's now that's Ring. So that's a different company to the thing that does your lights, right? And then, right, and so you've got the Apple TV, you've got whatever, but your TV is also a smart TV, so it has the Samsung built-in apps if you want to use the built-in apps. So then you're like, okay, fine. Then we had a family member gift us a Google Home Mini for Christmas, so that's a completely separate thing that really all I use it for is timing cooking, because we have it in the kitchen, so I just say, like, hey, Google, 10 minutes timer, please, right? But so we have that. And then, right, so the lights are on one thing, the doorbells are on a thing, or whatever. Now we've got the new dog. So we have like and it was cheap. It was cheap on Amazon, like a cheap little Wise Cam. But then the Wise Cam for the dog is like another thing. Suddenly you have like 85 smart apps just to control various parts of your home. Yeah. Right? None of this is good, by the way. If anyone's seen Brazil or Demon Seed or any of the movies that predict like smart future living, none of this is good, right? Because either the technology, I don't know, trap me in my home and molest me, right? Like in Demon Seed, or it's just going to be every morning I get up and try and do something simple like make toast, and the shower's going to explode or whatever, like in Brazil, right? So. Or the in Brazil, at the beginning, the movie, all his little gadgets don't really work, right? But then by the middle of the movie, his entire apartment is destroyed because you have to have government sanctioned heating engineers come out and touch the ducts. Right. But he has a non-sanctioned one, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose. So we're heading there, right? That's where we're headed. But anyway, I have all these different things, and people go, well, you can. There are apps that connect all these other apps, right? Right. And Apple has one. So Apple has Apple Home, right? Which you get on your phone as standard, right? Yep. But it doesn't integrate with every single one of them, right? So it integrates with the lights, but it doesn't integrate with the whatever. So it's, it's all insane. And suddenly, having bought a home, I'm literally living in Brazil.
Right.
And any minute now, my doors are going to lock. My
Yeah.
Ring cameras are going to start recording every move that I do. My phone is listening to me, and the government's going to start shipping me, I don't know, large amounts of fentanyl or something. You know, like something's going to happen. You know, I'm going to make a joke on the podcast this afternoon, and one of my smart things is going to be like, you know, this guy is a terrorist. You know, get him off the thing. I'm going to be dragged down. I'm going to be a political prisoner. Like something's going to happen, right? And that's the world we're living in. So I feel like it's one of those things where it slowly encroaches on your life. The more you want to engage with society. So buying a house is like engaging with societal norms, right? I don't want to get too highfalutin, but you know what I mean.
Yes, but I know what you mean. Exactly, yeah.
You buy a house, you go, another one has bought a house, and somewhere someone in the government has an orgasm. They're like, you see, people can still buy houses. You know what I mean? Like it becomes someone. The fact that 98% of the populace can't afford to buy a house has nothing to do with anything. And the fact that we were only able to afford to buy a house because someone died, which is absolutely true, has nothing. Like we couldn't afford a house. Like we afforded a house because someone else who grew up in a time when you could afford a house died, and we sold their house. That's how that happened, right?
Yeah.
And it's from tragedy, we try desperately to find a decency. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then once you do that, all the companies come for you. They're like, yes, we can sell them Ring doorbells and Wise cams and Google Home Minis. And then we were around a friend of ours' house who they were moving house, right? They were getting rid of a bunch of stuff, and we just moved into our house. So we're like, great, we'll pick up a bunch of stuff there. They had some chairs and some other stuff, right? Yeah. And the husband comes out carrying what are they called? Sonos speakers? A Sonos? Is that right? I don't know what they're called.
I know what you mean, though. Yeah,
Sonos?
I have the idea. Yeah, right.
No, seriously, Sonos. That's right. So he comes out carrying a Sonos speaker, and he goes, "I don't want it anymore. You have it." And I'm like, "Right, but I already have like." You know, I have smart TVs. I have a smart Google Home speaker. I have like whatever. He's like, fine, but it just takes on. What I didn't realize was I thought Sonos was just like another Bluetooth speaker. Oh no, Sonos is its own thing. Like you can't just be like play Spotify on Sonos. Oh no, you have to go into the Sonos app, find Spotify, and then it delivers Spotify in this kind of truncated form. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, there's no getting. Suddenly, I have a Sonos app, and I'm like, it's too many things.
Right.
I can't just. And it's funny because it's smart up until a point, but you can't say to Sonos like, hey, Sonos, start playing Spotify like you can with Google Home Mini. You have to go into the app and find it and blah, 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 blah. And it's a great speaker once it works. But so I find myself, someone's going to find me like strangled by the vacuum cleaner while the dehumidifier we got for the basement, it also has an app. Everything is a fucking app now. Like,
yes. No, I have to say, so you mentioned the Brazil piece. Yeah. I saw Brazil in the theater with a buddy of mine at the Indie Theater in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And these two kind of slightly older, kind of slightly bougie women were watching the film at the same time. And the kind of the earlier scene when, you know, the main character gets arrested and all of that, one of them turns to the other and goes, boy, this is really Kafka-esque. And my buddy, of course, just like really honed in on the Kafka-esque thing. And he would call everything Kafka-esque for like the next like 2 years. Everything was Kafka-esque as a joke. Yeah. But I had this image in my head of you struggling with all of these apps, like torturing you.
Yes.
And these two older ladies watching you from like some cam something, you're like your vacuum strangling you, all this stuff's happening. And they're like, oh, that's really Kafka-esque.
No, that's true. What's going to happen is like my Wise or Ring cam or one of these cams that I now have in my head, everything's filming me at all times, Matt.
Yeah.
But one of these Wise cams is going to capture me being strangled by the vacuum cleaner while the dehumidifier like sucks the blood out of my body or something. You know what I mean? And I'm absolutely destroyed. And you're right. The only people that are going to be left are like some Monty Python style older ladies. Right. They're going to be watching it on some sort of weird Terry Gilliam like monitor and be like, oh, isn't it Kafka-esque? Oh, how lovely. Look at him there getting strangled by the vacuum cleaner. That'll teach him to buy Hoover products, you know, or whatever it is, right? That'll teach him to buy a Dyson vacuum, don't you know, Dyson's, you know, whatever it is. And that's, and to be honest, dude, if that's the way I go out, like destroyed by my own need, my own like thoroughly middle class, semi-wealthy need to be surrounded by products. And look,
look, I'm totally like, obviously middle class, I have a job, I have a house, I have, all the things, right? But, the dehumidifier we bought at Walmart, it was the cheapest one we could find, what I mean? Like the wise can we bought at I mean, not that I have to justify myself to anyone. Fuck you and your judgments about middle class wealth. Fuck you. We're the ones that are slowly shrinking. You know what I mean?
Right.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Ty from Come Up and I, we've been doing these Bruce Willis movies, and somehow with this sort of this cinematic anarchy kind of thing that we just sort of infuse into the podcast where we're just talking about crazy ideas, we've come up with this idea that Donald Trump should be a villain in an Emmett Furla Oasis Bruce Willis movie,
Right.
And it's just the idea that like 13 minutes of
Donald Trump is a villain in
exactly.
98% of literature and movies. Sorry, carry on.
So just give him 13 minutes in an Emmett Furla Oasis, Bruce Willis, Mel Gibson, whatever movie,
yes,
and just have him choose scenery. And I can never tell who that would offend more, right? Like, are we offending the liberal audience that's listening to the podcast, but because they're like, you're not taking Trump seriously enough. He's a criminal. He's a rapist. He's, caused all this suffering. He's a fascist who wants to completely destroy democracy. Right. Right. Like there's that piece, or the Republicans, which to be honest, I don't really care if I upset the Republicans, but if they're listening,
I don't care if I don't care if I upset the uber left either. Right. They're equally as, well, they're not. So I need to be clear. They're not equally as bad. Right. The uber left are just annoying. They're annoying to the point where you just want to smack them around the face and go, shut up, have a hamburger, and stop taking life so seriously.
Right.
The people on the right are fascists. So I want to be clear. They're not the same, but they are. I put them out of my life in equal measure, if that makes any sense.
Right. No, for sure. And I think with Ty and I sort of just this idea that I don't even know where it came from. I think it was just one of these things where we were just like, I think it was because they had a really bad villain in the movie that really wasn't that compelling. And we were like, what if it was just Trump? Like, what if he just had, it's like he needs money, right? And of course, he doesn't need money because he's so good at grifting off of his supporters. So he's just like, oh, a new crisis has come up, and you should give me more money. And they just do.
But no, to put it into a movie terms that I've never been able to understand. And this is the thing, I always try and think of stuff within my wheelhouse. I can talk politics and religion and whatever with the best of them, but I try and think of things in terms of movies, right? Or music or creativity or art or whatever. And what I've never been able to understand ever about the Republicans that I come across now in the world, right? Not even the ones that I get sold on social media, which, they're the boogeyman, right? But the ones that I come across in real life and I talk to and I suddenly go, oh, okay, right. It'll be a perfectly normal conversation for an hour and then they'll say something about like, but of course my car would be a lot better if it weren't for black people. And you go, wait, what? Sorry, what's the car got to do? Where did that connection come from? And then, what I mean? Suddenly it goes down. Suddenly it goes down a road where you're like, I don't even understand. Wait, sorry, what?
Right.
You know what I mean? If it wasn't for the LGBTQs, we could get the roads fixed. I'm like, what? What's that? Sorry, you're disconnected. So it's true. I've had those conversations. Well, I'm just like, what? Who? Right. Well, if we weren't spending all this money on trans people, who's spending money on trans people? Where's that? What? Sorry, what? Anyway. The thing I've never been able to understand about Republicans, and by which I mean people who believe capitalism and corporate tax breaks beyond everything else. The people who will literally be like, we can never, ever charge these people any more than what we're charging. I believe that they're the job providers. I believe. So fiscal Republican, whatever you want to call it, right? Every single book, every single movie, and every single song ever written, right? Apart from like the few that Hercules is in. What's his name? Sorbo, Kevin Sorbo. Apart from the few where they're like, God is not dead. Here's a bunch of Republicans in a movie that no one but 3 people are going to watch. Apart from those films, I'm talking about all the normal average creative films. The fat cats or the piggies or whatever you want to call them are always the bad guys. They're always the bad guys. Yeah. The billionaires are always the bad guys. The big, flabby, idiotic, eat the poor are always the bad guys and have been since the dawn of literature. You know what I mean?
Like there's, like the big chieftain or whatever in some story who's like abusing his people, right?
Right.
That's like, those are the bad people in ancient stories, right? Like there's always some big fat bastard using all his poor, emaciated, weak servants and citizens as peons or slaves or whatever. And the big fat cat is always they're always the bad guy. So what were these people raised on? Did they read these books and go, no, it's perfectly legitimate that the chieftain, enslave all of their people and blah. Maybe I'm using the word chief. I just mean the big boss, the big guy, whatever, the big fat guy who sat there using everybody else as, either cannon fodder or slavery. Those people are always the bad guys in every story. Do they read them and go, I feel sorry for that guy. He got a bum rush in this story. Like, I don't understand it.
You know what it is? The big difference between America and like in Europe is that, in England, you have the class system, right? Where like, no matter how rich you get, right, you can't enter into that class. You can maybe marry somebody, but for the most part.
Oh, you have that here as well. Like, make no mistake. But yes, I know what you mean. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
You have it, but there's a myth around it here in America that anybody can move up. True. And they use that myth.
The one thing I will say that I find very interesting, because it's one thing to divide things up by race and gender and sexual orientation and country and culture and whatever. But here's a human nature side of this, right? Coming from two countries that people assume are very similar, the UK and the US, just because they are the big capitalist corporate empirical going around the world trying to own everything peoples, right?
Right.
Predominantly white, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Very, very similar. Here is the difference. In America, you get very little for your tax dollar, Social Security, whatever, right? And everything is a struggle, and everything is, most people will, even me, even Mr. Cushy, white, English, middle class, heterosexual male, will work until he drops dead, most likely, right? We'll have to have some form of job or income or something until he drops dead, right? In that country, in America, with all these issues, more or less everyone I've come across, it doesn't matter what, again, political party you subscribe to, what religion, whatever, and I've spoken to a lot of people in lots of different states, all of them have not a firm belief that they'll become a millionaire or a billionaire. Right. I think that's what we're kind of sold by the media, that everyone thinks they're going to become a billionaire. I don't think that's what people... I think the pervading sense I get from Americans when I speak to them is that they'll be able to be themselves and do what they want to do, right? Most people's fight in this country is, I just want to do this thing and be this person. Yeah. And the truth of this country, not for everyone, I understand it. I'm not talking for people outside of my groups of people that I may have spoken to. I'm just talking anecdotally. But most of the people I've come across are optimistic, is a good way to put it. And they are, have a go people. Like, just go have a go, do it, right? So if you show up in America and you go, I want to start a store, and all this store sells is big gnome hats with bells on the end. That's all this thing. An American, if you stop them on the street and go, I've had this idea, an American would go, that sounds great. Go do that, right? If you say in England, like, hey, I really like acting, I think I might want to train to be an actor, which is not as ridiculous as wanting a hat store that only sells big gnome hats with bells on the end. Yeah. Every single member of your family, let alone strangers, every single member of your family, people who love, respect, and cherish you, to a person will all go, have you thought about being an accountant? The pervading sense in the UK at its best is realism, and at its most normal is pessimism.
Right.
I think that's where I see the big difference. And the interesting side of that is you would think the country where you get handed more by the government would produce more innovation and more entrepreneurs. And in fact, the converse is true. So
that's the only thing I would say in favor of the American system. It might fucking suck for those who are in it, but it does weirdly, human beings somehow need to know that they're overcoming adversity to sort of succeed in something. It's sort of this weird human nature thing. If they just get handed it, it has no value to them. Like if someone just comes along and goes, hey, I bought you a store and I made the first 100 big gnome hats for you. Go ahead and run a business. The very next day you would cut to someone, that person who had a dream of doing a store owner, injecting heroin into behind his balls because he didn't feel like he earned the fucking store that he was. Do you know what I mean? Like that's human nature in its essence, I think.
Yeah, one of the funny things with that, when you talk about that, is that every time I would be in these like these get to know you events, or if I'm starting a job or something, like whatever it is, at orientation or something, and there's always like
the worst, aren't they?
Yeah, and there was like, what's your dream job, or what's your and I would always put trust fund baby. That's my dream job.
Yeah,
and
my dream is to not
kidding.
have to have a job. Yes.
Right? They would think I was kidding, and I was like, no. And one of the questions I would always get about this is like, well, wouldn't you be bored if you didn't have anything to do? And I was like, what do you mean if I didn't have anything to do? There are so many things that I would do as a trust fund baby. I would travel all over the world. I would write novels all day. I would watch movies and watch whatever movies that I wanted to watch whenever I wanted to watch them, because there are millions of movies out there. I don't know if maybe millions, but thousands, hundreds of thousands of movies. There's movies that I haven't seen that I've always wanted to see that, when I go through my Tubi queue, I could clean out my Tubi queue. And it's funny because you think about like being rich, right? You clean out your Amazon wish list or something like that. But really, the commodity that we have the least amount of is time. And the reason why we have so little time is because we're always having to spend money, right? I mean, if I was a trust fund baby, not only would I not have to work, right, but I also wouldn't have to run errands unless I really wanted to go out and run an errand. Right? I could just have everything delivered to me, and it wouldn't matter because money is not an issue. And it's funny because you hear this a lot in America, this idea of like, no, I need to work because for whatever reason. And it's like, and you saw, right? We saw during the pandemic when people had too much time on their hands, they were doing things like making sourdough bread, and like, look at how great I am for making sourdough bread. And it's like, right? Like there is this mindset of like you almost like it's part of your identity. Like you have to work, and it's like, yes, I like my job, I like doing what I do for work, but if suddenly somebody came to me and said, hey, Matt, I'm just going to give you, millions of dollars to just be, I don't know what the term would be, like not a confirmed bachelor in that sense, but like, you
just get to stay home for the rest of your life. Yeah, you don't have to work yourself into the early grave. Right, but I think that there's also a human nature thing whereby, and I know what you're saying about the pandemic, like people did sort of rally around and kind of start either creating or baking or doing whatever, but that was almost that was almost in response to a crisis, right? So that's a slightly different thing. When I've been unemployed, and it's not been a lot in my life, but the a couple of times that I have been unemployed, I always thought to myself, like, I would do more writing, I would do more of this, I would do more that, I would make a movie, I would watch a lot of TV, I would do whatever. And actually, you don't end up doing that, like, for some reason. It's almost like the structure, the responsibility, right? So it's to do with, if you have to be responsible for your own time, right? And I'm someone who, I do music, I do podcasting, I write movies, I have things I could be doing, Matt, you know what I mean? Instead of my day job, right? But, and I'm not lazy. I have a garden to look after. I have 2 dogs to look after. I have places I want to travel to. Like, give me 10 years, I could really fill those 10 years up. But you need the responsibility, structure, discipline is the word I'm looking for. You need the discipline to go, well, I'm going to get up at 10 a.m. and I'm going to write for the next 5 hours, right? Because what ends up happening is you get up at 10 a.m., it's suddenly noon, you go, well, I should get to writing today. Well, it doesn't matter. I can stay up late tonight. I'll write tonight. Let's just see what's on TV or whatever. Oh, look, I have cheesy snacks in the cupboard, right? Or whatever it is, right? And a week goes by of, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And suddenly you're surrounded by bags of, like, greasy, empty bags of cheesy snacks, right? You've gained 50 pounds. You've watched entirely too much daytime TV and you've gone a bit peculiar. And you've done none of the things that are on your list. However, if you have a full-time job suddenly the impetus to do the podcast has come back into my mind. I've started writing songs again. I've 30 pages into writing my movie. You suddenly, and I've got a new puppy and everything. Like, you suddenly, if your life isn't relentlessly busy, I feel like you don't get anything done. That might just be me, but
I'm kind of the opposite, because for me, like with work, like I'll sometimes zone out. Like I'll be like, I don't have the energy to work on writing. Whereas like when I have like a week off, like I have this week off, I've got a staycation week. It's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I'm going to get that. Actually, I should say, 'cause yes, it does. I kind of am able to kind of get myself on the computer.
You've written 3 novels, Matt, so you are disciplined.
Right, yes. Well,
I'm not that disciplined.
Here's the thing about writing novels or any of these things that I've discovered.
Oh, good, because this ties into, I want to say to everyone, hello and welcome to the After Movie Diner. Our guest today is Matt Poirier, who is a podcaster, novelist, film reviewer, bon vivant, and... And we're going to be talking not only about David Cronenberg's Crash, but also John Cross Makes a Movie, because that's the subtitle to the new After Movie Diner. And we're going to be talking about writing, because Matt's a writer. I've recently hit 30 pages, which is about the first act of my screenplay. If a screenplay is 90 minutes, and it should be Hollywood, listen, fucking 90 minutes, stop with these 3-hour fucking films, right? And if roughly each page of a screenplay is a minute long, which they say it is, then 30 pages is the first act of the screenplay. And sure enough, at the end of my 30 pages, the first character to die in my film has died, and the mystery has started. So I'm doing well with the structure and everything. So I've started writing. Matt's a writer. We're going to talk writing. Matt, writing novels, what have you learned? Let's kick it off.
Okay, so here's the thing: everybody talks about inspiration, right?
Right.
And
that was the subject of last week's podcast, ladies and germs.
Yeah, and maybe a good follow up on that is that for me, when it comes, everybody talks about like inspiration from a creative standpoint, right? And for me, I've never thought that was an issue, right? I mean, I watch reality shows and come up with and be like, oh, that would be great to put in a novel, all that kind of thing.
How do we kill all the MILFs on MILF Club or whatever it's called?
Exactly, right. So it's like, oh, that character seems interesting. I'll make a character out of that or whatever. Right. But the inspiration is in the production part of it. And it's like listening to you and Matt Farley talk about putting out movies. It kind of like I had kind of hit a wall with proofreading for the novel that I want to get out this year.
Right.
I'd kind of hit a wall with I don't know if I want to go back and read it again. But then I'm listening to both of you talk about, you putting out your albums, him putting out movies, you both talking about, getting a movie done and all that stuff. And I start to envision that book being on the shelf with the other 3 that I've self-published.
Yep.
And that's where the inspiration comes in. And I think the biggest piece of inspiration I ever got actually was on Bourdain's Parts Unknown or whatever. He was in Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh of all places, right?
I love Pittsburgh. I won't hear a word against it. No.
Yes, exactly. So he's interviewing a writer who wrote 15 novels. And I said, I should have 15 novels. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, that's the thing, and I mean, granted, like, I think one of the things that Matt Farley had said that is the most important thing is you got to get the first thing out there because, but actually, to be honest, the first thing is just the first thing. It's actually like the second and third. Like, I think, looking at your music, for example, True or Crime, I think is a really great example of really great album that you put out, but you had already put out like 1 or 2 albums already that, in 2020.
Yes.
And it's like, but it's like you that idea of like, hey, I can just put another album out. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I have to go a year of gathering all of this stuff and all,
No, I've never understood how millionaire musicians, right, who have every record company and recording studio available to them, spend 6 to 8 years making an album.
Right.
I do not understand. Now, I do understand on the record company side, they're like, look, we don't want to have to market and promote a new album from you every month. Like, I get that, right? So there's a middle ground, right? It's like, well, we could put like the Mountain Goats put out an album every year, right? More or less. Yeah. But every year they put out an album and Merge promotes them and markets them, but they do a lot of marketing themselves as well. And that seems like fine to me. Like, that makes sense to me, right? Yeah. And very often they have 2 or 3 albums recorded under their belt and they just kind of, drip feed them out over time. I don't understand the people who are like, it took us 10 years to write these 8 songs. And I'm like, what? Then you're not, then to my way of thinking, you should probably stop writing the songs.
Right.
You're a really good performer and you're a really good musician. But if it's taking you 10 years to write 8 songs and only 3 of them are any good, get someone else to write the songs. And I'm not claiming every time I put an album out, I hit it out of the park. But I tell you what, you could probably, based on all the albums I put out over the last 5 years, you could probably make 8 good 10-track albums out of that and drip feed them out over the next, 8 years or whatever, if that's what you wanted to do. One of the things that I love about albums, especially digital albums, is how easy they are to put out, right? I get to literally go from demos recorded on my phone, wherever I happen to have a musical instrument, to a fully finished album with a track listing, a description of why I wrote the album, a front cover, fully mastered tracks that I was able to do on e-mastered online. Like I didn't even have to go to pay for someone to master them. I just used the AI mastering, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely fine. Like I couldn't care less, right? Yeah. And I'm able to go from, a blank page to fully done album in a week if I wanted to, wanted to, right? If I wanted to put that effort in. Novels, obviously, they're a little harder. They're a lot bigger. There's a lot more pages. There's a lot more writing. There's whatever. And then movies are the hardest because you have to not only write a script, which is almost like writing a novel, not as long, but it's, you have to put as much, whatever. But then you've got to mount cast and your crew and cameras and lights and sound and edit equipment and all the rest of it, right? So that's even a bit. So when people are like, film directors like put out a movie every 4 years, I'm like, oh, all right, that makes sense, right? Yeah,
right.
When people do a movie every year, I'm kind of a bit like, wow, they must never stop working. But but when they put one out every 4 years, I'm about, when there's a film director like Terrence Malick, where they're like, for 30 years, I'm not going to put a film out. Like, right. What was Terrence Malick doing for 30 years?
Right.
But because he then started putting out a movie like every year after that. And suddenly we had too many Terrence Malick movies. And I was kind of like, could Terrence Malick go back on a 30-year hiatus, please? Enough already. No, I'm kidding. But no, sorry. So go on about your novel, yes.
Well, no, because it's a great book. So I gave myself a chance. So speaking of the whole sourdough bread thing during the pandemic, so the novel that I'm trying to get out this year,
it's called Sourdough. No,
it's called Sourdough, right? So I gave myself a challenge in April of 2020 to see if I could do 4,000 words a day, because at the end of the month I would have 120,000 words a day. I mean, that's, for a novel, like 80 to 100,000 is a good number. So it's like, I'd have 120,000 words, And what ended up happening was that I did the 4,000 words a day, but then got to the 30th day of the month and actually wasn't finished yet. It ended up being like closer to 130. The problem with that is that proofreading something like that, like going through and fixing. And I think, again, Matt Farley made a great point on your previous podcast about like with the script and having people proofread a script, right? Nobody's going to proofread a 130,000 word novel and be like, I'm going to go through that unless you pay them. Which,
and
of course,
I think even Stephen King only says to do 2,000 words a day. So 4,000 words a day, you're like doubling up on King. You're like, take that, King.
Exactly.
I'm going to be even more prolific than King is.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But it was the fact that it was like, I can do that. But the thing is the process from there is to then like, okay, so like my goal is every year I write a rough draft of a novel. So it's like, something in the 90 to 100,000, except for not last year, but the year before I did like 2, I don't know if novella is the right term, but 2 like, 50, 60,000 word ones that are, hopefully next year I'll get one of the 2 out at least.
Nice.
But the idea is that I have a novel that a rough draft that I write every year, and then I self-publish one every year. That's been the goal since 2020 when I first put out Chad and Accounting. I had been writing because before Chad and Accounting in 2020, I had written a couple rough drafts that are now novels that are out, Girl in a Gun and Holtman Arms. Yes. I wrote them, 2018, 2019, and just kind of kept, working through them. But
the links of which will be in the podcast description, and I urge everyone to go buy them. I own all 3 of them, and they look spanking on my shelves. They're also a fantastic read. And I think at some point we need to put an audiobook out, Matt, with you and I doing all the voices. But we'll get to that. Anyway, carry on, sir.
Yeah, that would be right. But yeah, I think it's one of those things like once I wrote and the thing with Chad and Accounting was that thing had sat. I wrote Chad and Accounting. I actually wrote another novel before this. And that's I think it was another piece that I think either you or Matt Farley mentioned about like, maybe not do your best thing right away or something like that. But the other thing too is that like I wrote a novel in the 2000s called 29 that I still hasn't seen the light of day. It's still not right in a good enough place to be able to publish it, I don't think. But it just kind of showed me that I could do it. It was like, oh, okay, here's this thing that's 100,000 words, and it's a novel, and it's coherent, and it all works. And then I was trying to sell that novel. I was like sending it to agents and things like that. And at the same time, I came up with the idea for Chad and Accounting and finished that one quicker. But then it was like I moved here to Pennsylvania or to Philadelphia, got married, all this stuff. And I kind of just left it. And I don't know what happened for a few years. I just wasn't really working on any writing at all. I wasn't working on the blog either. The blog was on hiatus and all of that. And then I just started working on it again. And I was like, this novel's ready. Like, this thing it's as ready as it's going to be.
Yeah.
Why don't I? And it wasn't like one of those things where I planned it out where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do this and this. And I was just like, no, I had in my head that I was going to have a black cover with white writing for the just a very plain cover, and I just did it. And it was out there, and I was like, okay, that's it. It's there. But then it was like, that's one of the things I think I learned with that process. And I don't know if maybe you learned the same thing with your albums or anything like that, but when I first put that novel out there, I didn't tell everybody because I wasn't really sure, like, if I want to just be like, hey, everybody, I wrote a novel or whatever.
Right.
And so friends and family kind of found out about it like kind of secondhand.
Yeah.
They, saw like on maybe on my DTV connoisseur Twitter or whatever, but they found out. And it was like one of those things where I'd get a text like, hey, Matt, check out the new book I'm reading. And it's like, oh, that's awesome. You read it or whatever. So when the second one came out, I was like, okay, I'm going to tell everybody about this one because, they're all going to be happy. What I discovered was the novelty of Matt writing a novel had worn off. And like, they were just like, oh, Matt's doing this all the time now. He's going to do one of these one a year now. Like, I've got to just buy a novel of his every year. Like, I didn't know that I was going to do that. And so, so now the shine's worn off.
Again, back to the thing that I said earlier, the family that like love you, want you to exist, or supposedly, right? Those are the people that are going to be like, oh, it's really cute you did this thing, but like stop repeating it. Like, we don't need you to do that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, granted, fortunately, my siblings, my siblings have been good about it. Now, one of the funny things was the first novel, my mom bought 15 copies of it, and it was one of those things where I'm like looking at the Amazon sales, and I'm like, oh my God, I sold 15 copies today. And then I was like, I have a hunch where this happened. And I texted my mom. She was like, yes, I did. And she gave my siblings the copies, and they were like, why did you do that? We wanted to buy his book. Right. So they've been buying, but the funny thing, she went from 15 to 3 for the second one. Right. And I don't think she's bought the most recent one yet.
No. My mom used to, and bless her, she used to buy all my albums until I went on that tear and started releasing one a month. Mm-hmm. And then, it stopped, which is absolutely fine. I don't
exactly.
So this is where we're getting to with this. And what I have to be 100% about, right? I feel that I saw this with podcasting when I first started podcasting. And remember, people, I've been doing this 12 years, right?
Yes, so you're part of my answer. You got me into podcasting.
So this was back when everyone did not have a podcast. I understand that everyone now has a podcast, exactly. Right? Literally, what's hilarious was, the odd comedian like Mark Maron or whatever would have a podcast, and other comedians would go on it and blah, 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 blah. Now, every single comedian who was ever on the Mark Maron podcast has their own podcast, and they all interview each other all the time, right? It's funny because, Conan O'Brien decided once he finished his run on his TV show, like, to do a podcast. And I love his podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. I think Conan O'Brien is hilarious. He's very quick-witted, a great improviser, whatever. But almost every guest he has on, and it doesn't matter if the guest is a musician, an actor, a diplomat, or whatever, he all starts, almost every interview now starts, so you started a podcast, right? So I'm going back to when everyone did not have a podcast. Like Mark Maron had a podcast, Kevin Smith had a podcast, but not everyone had a podcast, right? When I started podcasting. And what I saw back then, and I still see to this day, and this ties into what you're talking about, is I would see one or two things. I would either see the people who would lie, and they'd put 3 episodes of a podcast nobody would give 2 shits about out into the world, and then be like, our 3rd episode got 10,000 downloads, and you'd be like, no, it didn't. Like, no, it didn't. Jeff from Iowa, like 10,000 people did not download your podcast about, painting figurines or whatever podcast is about. That's not to say, by the way, that Jeff from Iowa shouldn't have a podcast about painting figurines. Right. Everyone should have a podcast if they want one. But it didn't get 10,000 downloads by the 3rd episode, because that's not how it works, right? Right. The second thing I would see is I would see people that were honest, and by the 3rd episode be like,
I didn't get as many downloads as I wanted. I don't know whether I can keep doing this, right? And what those two behaviors tell me is it's about attention. You're putting something out about attention, right? You either want the 10,000 download or you don't. And listen, I have been guilty of this myself. I often joke, and certainly joked when I shut down the podcast last year, that, you know, our engagement had dwindled to the point where, like, if you don't care about it, why the fuck should I care about it, right? And there's like 60% joke, 40% truth in that, right? So I'm not absolved from the idea of every time I put something out, I want it to be a huge fucking thing. Of course I do, right? I want to put an album out and people be like, finally, John puts out the best album of the year and everyone goes crazy over it. Of course I want that, right? I'm not saying I don't. But that's not why I put them out. That's the difference. Yeah. So you can want that. You can want that till you're blue in the face, right? And if you do 10,000 hours of something, luck and opportunity and various other things might present themselves where you could turn it into something, right? The closest I've seen, and I almost was able to do this with the After Movie Diner, but it wasn't the route that I wanted to go. But my good friend Brad Gullickson, who used to do the In the Mouth of Darkness podcast and now does comic book counseling podcast and the B&B movie reviews on his local public access, but also on YouTube. He started the podcast, but what he used to do is he used to go to conventions all the time, right? Yeah. And he was doing the podcast, was going to conventions, and conventions, when you do all your social about them and you're doing podcasts about them, whatever, sooner or later, a marketing agency or a PR firm or something will come up to you and be like, hey, do you want to go to this thing? Do you want to go to that thing? You know, whatever. And that happened with me. I got free entry to the Philly Comic Con like 3 or 4 years in a row. I got screeners sent to me by screener companies, et cetera, right? I could never make it out to like Brad used to fly around he used to go to San Diego, he used to find all sorts of different things, right? But I was never able to do that, didn't have the money to do whatever. But he was able to turn that into a situation where now he's doing a show that is like uniquely his and his wife's, because him and his wife are both, you know, huge comic book fans. You know, it's comic book counseling. It's about relationships both within comic books and reality, mixed with obviously long through lines and storylines in comic books. So it's part of the zeitgeist anyway, right? It's got that self-help quality to it, which people love. And they've been able to, and because Brad and also to some extent Lisa had been going to all these festivals, going to all these conventions, and actually when they got home, sitting down and actually writing the reviews, putting those reviews out, promoting those reviews, telling the PR companies about the reviews, there was an inroad there where they were able to build it up to the point where, like, Brad Gullickson, like, is a legitimate film reviewing entity now, right? Like as much as you can be in the world of, you know, 24/7, 365 media that never goes away, right? Brad has been able, he interviews like routinely very famous people, Patton Oswalt and Dolph Lundgren and other people on his show all the time, as well as comic book royalty that I don't really know. But he's been able to parlay that, you know, he gets San Diego stuff. He's got tickets to other conventions. He goes to film festivals. He gets quoted. Leonard Maltin knows who he is. Like, he's a guy now, right? And he's basically put in the 10,000 hours, followed every bit of luck, followed every lead, followed every opportunity, right? And there was a moment where through the lifetime of the After Movie Diner that I definitely could have done that, right? I definitely could have done. I don't regret not doing it. But there were certain occasions where it was like, you can get into this convention for free. You can write about this film thing. I had PR companies sending me stuff. And if I wanted to be, you know, a film reviewer, right, or an interviewer, or a PR person or whatever, I could have gone down that road. Definitely. There were opportunities and things handed to me, right? So you do anything consistently enough, you do anything for enough hours, and you are good enough at that thing. Opportunity, luck, various other things will present itself, right? And that's maybe why you do them, and that's a perfectly legitimate reason to do them. But back to the previous two examples where you're either, you're both wanting attention, and if attention doesn't come, you either lie about it or you give up, right?
Right.
I see that all the time. I'm more of a creative person. I know people want to call me like a film reviewer. I don't consider myself a film reviewer. I'm a film fan. Have I written reviews? Have I done podcast reviewing? Yes, of course. But I don't want that to be my career, right? Never did. What I want is to put creative, silly, opinionated, wild, idiotic stuff into the world. I want to just create stuff and put it out there. I want to, by putting out hundreds of albums, I want to become a better songwriter. I want to find my voice. I want to become a better musician. I want to make better collaborative partners. Like, I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in the creative process when it comes to the podcast. Would I love thousands of listeners? Of course.
Right, exactly.
Would fucking love thousands of listeners.
Yeah.
But I do it for a multitude of reasons, mainly because it's a nice creative outlet. Secondly, it's a good regular outlet. Thirdly, it's a great way to just keep up with my friends, right? So I think what you were getting at and what I've taken a long time to say is let it be its own reward, I think is what you were sort of saying. And that sounds, the reason why I didn't just say that and move on is there's any number of inspirational posters that will have some shit like make the journey its own reward fucking nonsense on it. And everyone listening to this podcast who's ever wanted to be creative would be like, shut the fuck up. All I get all day is people saying to me, like, the journey is its own reward, right?
Right.
What I'm trying to say is something a little bit more nuanced than that, which is about if you're a creative person, right? Take what you might get out of it. Take the money or the attention or the download numbers or whatever it is. Take that out of it. If you're a creative person, I think that you should have the right to create as much or as little as you want, but you should create. And creation, like anything, and this is a Matt Farley thing, but like and I've heard other people say it, but like the brain is a muscle. The more you use it, the better it gets, right? Creativity is the same. The more songs I've written, the better songwriter I am. But it's not just that I'm a better songwriter, it's that I've done it enough that I can say that. So for the first 20 years that I was writing music, you asked me anything about my music, and I'm not humble or phony about it. I genuinely don't I genuinely am like, please don't give me any attention for my music. I'm not sure that I even like it, right?
Right.
It took me, I've been doing quote unquote serious music, serious songs, writing and recording stuff on 4-track since I was 15 years old, right? Before that, I did some comedy music and stuff with my friend John, but like in general, and I've been playing music since I was 4, but my songwriting started when I was 15. And it's only in the last 3 years that I could say to you, I think I'm an okay songwriter now. It took that long for me to even be able to say that, let alone listen to it and genuinely think it, right? So that's the other thing we're all doing, us creative people. Very often we're insecure. Very often we, have been beaten down by all the people saying, have you just tried to be an accountant? And what I did was I was just like, well, I can't not do it.
Right.
I walk around and I think up sketch ideas or I think up song ideas and I have to put them somewhere. And we live in a world now where a microphone is in the phone that you're carrying around with you. There is a recording device on the phone with you there that records, as well as like Nebraska, the Bruce Springsteen demo that he made in his bedroom, in New Jersey years ago sounds like, right? So no, it may not sound like fucking, a huge wall of sound recording studio with all the bells and whistles, but you can get GarageBand on your phone. You can have just memo recorder on your phone, whatever it is. And as long as you have a musical instrument, a voice, and something to sing about, you can record a song. And through Bandcamp, put it out for free, right? So there's nothing to stop you now, right? So my thing has always been, well, I'm not going to create. And Matt Farley inspired me to be like, just put everything out. Like, you'll find your way. And then not only that, but by the end of it, just like with your books, with my albums, I look at it and I go, you know, I have a collection. I have there's a through line here. There's experimentation. There's, getting better. There's getting better play, getting better collaborators, there's something you can look back at it. There aren't many bands in the world. The one that I was thinking of is the Beatles, because they went from mop top to, inventing heavy metal in like 6 years, which is bizarre, right? Right. Well, they went from like mop top to psychedelia to inventing heavy metal, but in general, they kind of are a bit unique in that. But if you look at my last 10 years of output, like, there's a similar through line there in sort of the music I'm playing and the instruments I have on the album and the songs I'm writing and stuff I'm writing about and the way that my lyrics have changed and blah, 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 blah. That to me is interesting. It doesn't have to be successful. That's just interesting. I have a body of work now, and having a body of work is its own reward. And so, and similarly with a podcast, right? Is every single podcast I've put out there fucking gold? No. I would say about 150 episodes of the previous 353 could be washed away and I wouldn't miss them. But there's 10 episodes of the last 353 that if I lost them or they weren't out there or whatever, I'd be devastated, because I think they're 10 of the best things I've ever done with my life. So, like, that's where I take my reward from. And if, we're about to do... another episode of Sleazy, Spader, Springtime, right? I had all but, we started Sleazy, Spader, Springtime as a joke, right? We did it for 5 years. After that, Jim was like, I don't really want to do it this year. I didn't want to do it either. But when I started back up the podcast, I'm like, you know what? Andy Lunn really likes Sleazy, Spader, Springtime, right? He's a friend I made on the internet who I got to meet in London. He writes us emails every time we do Sleazy, Spader, Springtime. And I'm like, I'm bringing it back because I'd taken a year out and I was like, okay, great. I'm ready to bring back Sleazy, Spader, Springtime. B, because it still gives me a joy that I've managed to, squeeze this much ridiculousness out of the idea. And thirdly, because you know what? Andy Lunn never turned around and went, fuck John Cross in the After Movie Diner. You know what I mean? He just stuck with it. Right. So if I do these next couple of episodes where I'm covering Spader films just for Andy Lunn, I think that's absolutely fine. Better to do it for Andy Lunn, who's going to respond, than do it for 10,000 people you'll never hear from. So, that's where I'm at. Anyway, Matt, I rambled a long time, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I definitely do.
Apologies. We sadly have to pause for some ads. Maybe if more of you supported us on Patreon. But there it is. The After Movie Diner doesn't endorse any of these advertisers. We don't even know what you're going to hear. It's forced technical AI wizardry. And don't fool yourself. None of us are in control. The robots are coming, and they want to sell us insurance.
I mean, I think, with the podcast thing, I finally got to a point where I'm doing every other week with the podcast. And I used to be one of these people that would, like, when I was first doing the podcast in 2014, when Jamie is my co-host, and I was part of that night of podcasting that you and Mo had put together. And it was just me going on, like, what was it? Mixler, I think it was. And,
yes.
And recording. And then it was like one of those things where her life was getting busy because she's moving up to Michigan, and her and Brian were starting their life, and Jen and I were starting our life here, and it was one of those things where it was like kind of week after week, it was like, which one of us is going to be busy and not be able to do it, and finally it just kind of shut down, and then the blog went with it, and then it was like fall 2019, it just was like, I kind of want to just do this stuff again, but even then it was like I was kind of wishy-washy, it was like, I'm going to do a podcast, and then it was like, I don't have a guest. I don't have anything to do. I'm just this month I'm not going to do a podcast. It was kind of like an up and down thing. And the thing I learned from it is most people, at least for me, and I don't know for with my podcast, most people don't care whether I put a podcast out or not. Like, I shouldn't say they don't care if I don't put a podcast out. They care if I put the podcast out, right? The people that follow it, they want to listen to the episode. But if I don't, they're not going to miss it if I don't.
That's what I found with the After Movie Diner is, at one point it was every week. I'm going to try and do this second series every week if I can. But like, if I don't put one out for a month, no one said anything.
Right. And so I was like, okay, but it was like one of those things where, like, if I want to create some momentum, I've got to try to do it every other week. I got to try to make this happen. But even with that, it's like, 1 week an episode will do whatever, it's like, it's not, there's like this mindset with creative stuff. I think kind of going back to your thing about sort of like this whole pulling yourself by the bootstraps and like, hard work, it kind of all pays off. With creative stuff, it doesn't, like, from a mindset of like the 10,000 hours and getting your working the creative muscle, right? That's always building upon itself. You're always making progress there.
Right.
But when you put something out, it's like one thing could, get a whole bunch of downloads or a whole bunch of sales or a whole bunch of whatever. The next thing you put out, you might be like, boy, I'm really building. This next thing's even better than that. And that gets nothing, and it's like this and there's never really a reason why. I mean, there's probably reasons and I just don't know what they are because there's no.
Dude, I found this with the interview podcast. I could interview random director of indie movie no one had ever heard of, or I could interview Peter Weller or Michael Ironside or whatever, and the same result. It's not. There's no rhyme or reason to it or indication of whether something's going to be successful or not. Here's what I would say is I would say that right now, with algorithms and pay to play and everything else, and social media just being awash with noise generally,
right.
Then the one thing I would add to the 10,000 hours is, and I would say someone like Brad kind of did this by, as I say, flying off to festivals and various other things and kind of getting his face and his brand and his writing out there, and making connections, right? It's all about networking, right? My wife is a phenomenal networker. There are people who she worked with in jobs 20 years ago who will call her up randomly and be like, hey, are you still doing marketing? We've got a gig for you, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a good networker. I have great friends. I have hundreds of great friends. I'm not a good networker. I don't keep in contact with people who I worked with years ago. But I would say the missing thing to the 10,000 hours thing in modern times now is at the low end networking, at the bigger end, it's money.
Yeah.
So if you, the other thing you could do, along with sort of putting a podcast out every other week or putting a book out every year or whatever it is, would be to say, I'm going to take $50 a week for the next 5 years and put it in a bank account or whatever you can afford. And then when that's done in 5 years' time, I'm going to blow it all on marketing that's going to highlight the fact that there are 5 books out there that people should read, right?
Yeah.
So that's the bit that's missing is that, and I used to try it when Facebook pay to play first came onto Facebook pages. I was like, I interviewed Peter Weller or whatever, or I interviewed Clint Howard or someone, or William Sadler. Like, I interviewed William Sadler the year that he was in Iron Man 3 and Machete Kills, two of the biggest fan films that came out that year, right? He was in both of them. I interviewed him about both of those, right? Put it out there, marketed it on every group and page and blah, 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 whatever. And it got some downloads, but it didn't break 600 or whatever. You know what I mean? It wasn't that it suddenly had thousands of downloads, right? And I paid on Facebook like $50 or whatever. And the thing is Facebook advertising is not designed for $50. It's designed for like $1,500 or $50,000, right? So it's not that they won't do what they say for $50. They just won't do it very well. They'll do it much better if you pay the $15,000, right?
Exactly.
So that's the missing ingredient, I think, is if you want to be successful, expect that some of the money you make from your regular day job, obviously talk to your wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, or family member or whatever. But just say, I'm sorry, I'm going to be saving up for this thing, so that
maybe someone will actually watch my movie or listen to my album or whatever it is. Otherwise, just be prepared to be happy that you did it at all and be thankful for that. So, Matt, before we ease into the cum-flecked velour tracksuit pants of Sleazy Spader Springtime, and by the way, listeners, that is the official costume for Sleazy Spader Springtime. You have to have cum-flecked velour tracksuit pants. Because that's what he wears in the privacy of his own home, with his gut out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's no. If he has the tracksuit top on, he has it unzipped with the gut out. And a pair of shades on, and his Trilby hat from the Blacklist for no reason whatsoever, and probably a flouncy little scarf. To accentuate the nakedity of his gut.
Yes, the gut and the whole like upper crust, Boston, Massachusetts breeding, Mr. Oh, I knew John when he was I went to school with John. Here's my scarf.
I had dinner with Jackie O.
Exactly. Right.
I love how he tried to like humanize himself when he was on the Tonight Show and he talked about like throwing up in the Kennedy's house. I'm like, it doesn't make it any better. You were having dinner with the Kennedys. You know what I mean? It is what it is. Anyway, you Lothario, you golden head quisling. Anyway, so writing. So I want to I put out the episode last week. That episode was actually recorded a while ago, but it's good that I put it out last week because while editing and stuff, I got to listen to it again, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a really good idea there where Matt says, because what's embarrassing about that episode I put out last week, and I'm really glad I put it out, but what's embarrassing is it was obvious to anyone who listened, I didn't really have any ideas. The idea that I had is I want to make a film, right? That's the idea I had. I haven't made a film in 20 years. I want to make a film, right? And it's making a film. It's not as easy as going, I want to make an album and then just being like, throw some words together that rhyme and pick up an instrument, right?
Right.
You have to write a film, right? You have to sit down and write it. And while I don't have a Charlie Roxburgh like Matt has a Charlie to bounce ideas off, I do have a Jay Mayo. I do have a Matt Poirier. I do have my friend John Wallace. Like, I have people I can go to. And Jay Mayo and I, back towards the beginning of the year, we did a Skype session where we made each other laugh for 3 hours, basically, and came up with like 4 or 5 scenes that if we're in a movie, we would just howl with laughter, right?
Yeah.
And there was an outline, but there was no characters, there was no plot, there was no whatever. It's just like, oh, these 2 bounty hunters are chasing a serial killer and funny shit happens along the way, right? But there was no real idea. And anyone who listened to last week's episode could tell it was all sort of, well, I have this idea that maybe it's a siege movie and maybe it's a detective thing and maybe it's whatever. But I had no ideas, right? And that's the problem, right? Is that I've not been thinking in film terms for very long. I've been thinking in album terms, right?
Yeah.
But Matt said something last week, and when I was editing it, I took note, where he goes, all these disparate little ideas that you have or scenes that whatever, he's just like, put it all into one movie. Yeah. Like, just combine it, right? So what I did was, since 2020, like yourself, where you started writing your books, I decided to write some films, right? I'd got more back into, I felt like I'd finally got into a place in America where I'm like, I could probably call on 10 people, every other weekend or whatever to kind of make something, right? Even if it was just 2 people one weekend, another 3 people another weekend or whatever. I know enough people in America now that if I was like, hey guys, I'm making a movie, as long as I drive to you and I stick the camera in your face, you'll be in this thing, right? Like, I know enough people now, right?
Right.
Not that I need any of them to be professional actors or whatever. That's not the movie I'm making. I'm making a movie for me.
Yeah.
So I knew that. Kim went out a year later and got me an incredible camera, right, for Christmas. And I'm just like, well, now I have to do something, right?
Yes.
Then we bought the house and blah, blah, blah. A whole bunch of stuff happened last year and I didn't get around to doing anything. But when this year started, I'm like, there's 2 things. By the end of this year, I'm going to have written a movie and at least plan to start making it. And the other thing I want to do this year is become an American citizen. Like, those are my two goals for 2023, right? So, and, you know, for the first half of the year, I was kind of scrambling. I didn't know what. I recorded that podcast with Matt because I'm like, I need something that's going to kick me up the ass. And I thought, well, if I bring the podcast back and make it about me making a movie, maybe there'll be a little bit of a tiny groundswell behind it. Maybe, you know, and so sure enough, Robin Doyle, who used to write from Edinburgh in his shed, we used to call it Tales from the Shed, or no, Postcards from the Shed, sorry, or Shednanigans. Robin Doyle reaches out every so often and says, like, how's the script going? Michael Fitzgerald, who has been a constant supporter of the show on Twitter, has asked about the script. Other people have said, you know, about the script and so on like that. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a weekly update where I tell everyone what's happening and where I'm at and so on. And it'll take, you know, keep me honest and take me to task or whatever. And it was obvious the last episode, like I say, embarrassingly few ideas. But anyway, I, like you, in 2020 started to write some different stuff, right? So I went back through my Google Drive and I found 4 or 5 scripts plus all those ideas that Jay Mayo had and I had been going through, and I kind of went, well, what is here? And they weren't 4 or 5 completed scripts. There were 4 or 5 scripts I'd started and then not done anything with. And what was great about them was I'm like, well, wait, you know, because I tend to write in sketch form, right? I write like Monty Python writes. They wrote a bunch of sketches and then put it together and made it Life of Brian. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's how I tend to do it. So I had all these sketches in all these different movies that weren't necessarily like plot drivers, but they were really good character introductions, right? So I was like, oh, I have this evil CEO character from this script, and I have this, you know, 2 male friends kind of clerks, Mallrats kind of characters from this script, and I have, you know, this kindly old couple from this script that I, you know, and I had suddenly started looking, and I'm like, well, I knew that I've always known that I want to film predominantly around where I live. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go to other places and get interior scenes with other people, but predominantly I want to kind of film where I live. Also, you said something earlier in the podcast about like maybe not do your best idea first, right? And I think Matt had said that last week. So again, it was like, how do I just find a small movie idea that I can just make, right? Just get something out there, and like Farley, in 10 years' time, maybe I make my bigger one, right? But let's just get the first one out there. So that's what I started to do. I started putting these scenes together, and I'm like, well, if I change that and write a scene here and give it an introduction there and blah, 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 this is the first act of a film, right? So that's what I did. So the other weekend, I sat down, I put all these things together, and it became the first act of a movie. But even better than that, because I'm like, well, I want to do a detective thing. I love detective things. And every idea that I've had has had some kind of detective idea in it. I just like detective things. So I'm like, okay, there's a detective. Okay, there's all these characters. Okay, there's a small town. So it's going to be a small town crime murder film with this detective, right? So I had all these things set up. This is how it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. And through organizing these other scripts, through rewriting them, because I went through and did second drafts on all the scenes, changing them, I added like 3 or 4 new scenes as well, because I kind of went, well, I have this archetype, but I don't have this and this. Great. Okay. So I need this and this. And what I found was that by doing this practice and putting these things together, not only did I have more than I thought I had, but it was answering all the questions that just sat looking at a blank piece of paper wasn't answering, right? So where I have the biggest problem is structure. And I couldn't decide, you know, who'd be murdering who, why would they be murdering, you know, how would the detective figure it out, blah, 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 blah. By putting these scenes together, by knowing that I want it to be a small town with these crazy, weird characters in it, doing what they're doing, and that a detective would have to be pulled in at some point, and that someone was going to get murdered at some point, and so on and so forth, all the answers I needed to the structure and the plot and where I'm going now were in there, and I had no idea of that. And it drove home to me what Farley has always said: just start. Like, just start. So the exciting news I have for the second episode of John Cross Makes a Movie is that the script is now well underway. I know how to write the next 2 acts. I know what the characters are going to be doing. I know who the murderer is. I know why. And I'm very, 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 very excited about this. So that's my update. And I think that's just really fucking cool. But it drives home, as I said, just start. Because I spent 6 months going, but what's the structure and who does what? And trying to do Post-it notes and drawing charts and graphs and whatever. I didn't take my own advice, which is I don't sit there and go, I want to write a song about this. I just start writing lyrics and a song forms. Yeah. And I just had completely forgotten to do that. So the good news is first act is done. Matt, is it the same for you?
Yeah, so what I do is I start to craft an idea in my head, and I have a thing for these little mini notebooks that I get at Rite Aid. I don't know why I like them, but they seem to great. And I'll just start drafting it out. Like I'll just do the outline, and then I'll start kind of going over each chapter, like what I want in each chapter. But there is a point where it's like, okay, I just got to dive in and do it. And it's interesting because the one that I'm going to write this year, the novel that I want to write this year, actually is about a detective as well. In my novel, A Girl and a Gun, I had actually written a script. The main character writes a movie called A Girl and a Gun. And I actually put the script for A Girl and a Gun in the movie, but the formatting didn't work with Amazon Kindle, like with the Kindle Unlimited. Right. It wasn't. So I just took it apart and I was like, I'm going to convert it into novel form and actually make it like one of 3 stories that the main character it goes through.
Nice.
But it's like that idea of like, okay, it's kind of fun to have the notebook and write everything down, but really it's good to just get in there and type. Or like the other thing too, where you were taking these pieces and putting them in things, that's another thing too, that it's like, I always save everything that I've written. Almost every novel that I have has like an extra pieces Word document. Where it's like where I'll write something like, for example, the one that's coming out this year. I wrote it obviously in April, and there were scenes in there that I read, and I was like, I don't know that I really like that scene in the book anymore. I don't think it works anymore. So it's just copy or just highlight and then just Control X and then just paste it into this other Word document that just has it all. And you can see, right, that you were able to take some of these pieces from other things and paste them in together. It's like one thing that's great about computers, there's two, it's good and bad, right? Because with computers, like, you don't have to save everything, right? It's not like a piece of paper that's stacked everywhere. But of course, right, if you lose it, right, if the Google Drive goes away or whatever, then it's gone for good. But there's value in a lot of these things. It just like you just never know when you're going to need some kind of scrap that you were using before. And but it sounds really cool that you're at this stage where you're kind of like, okay, I know where I want to take this thing. And then it's like the writing part is almost easy at that point, right? Because you're just kind of, I don't want to say vomiting on the page, but you're just typing and just putting it down there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what's funny is like little things, right? So I'm gonna, Matt last episode encouraged me to just tell people what's going on and not hide anything back. I'm not going to tell people who the murderer is, so I'm not going to give away the twist at the end of the film. Yeah. But there is something. So I had started in 2020 to write the After Movie Diner, the movie, right? Yeah. And essentially it was like, well, there's new owners at Radio Flange Goblet and they want to get rid of the After Movie Diner and blah, 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 blah. And everyone was sort of like, well, it's a bit like UHF, the Weird Al movie. And it's also like a particularly typical kind of, that's what you'd expect, right? Yeah. And I don't mind that. Like all genre film, have typical beats in them and so on. And people should not be afraid. Another good writing lesson. Do not be afraid of, like, every action movie as well, Matt, has basically the same formula, right? And we wouldn't like it if it had a different formula, right? If if the evil drug lord hadn't kidnapped the good guy's daughter, and then, the good guy would have no reason to go through Mexico, killing everyone or whatever it is, right? Right,
exactly, yeah.
That, everything has a formula, everything, and even the few that so-called twist the formula, if you look one layer beneath, it's still the formula. So don't be afraid of formula. So it wasn't just that, but I was also like, right, but it's Radio Flange got, and then I'm like, right, but then we then you have to have scenes of people who are hundreds of fans of the After Movie Diner championing us, blah blah blah, or whatever, and it just became, I don't know, it was one of those things where I'm like, I would love to write After Movie Diner the movie, but but I just didn't know how I was going to film it, right?
Yeah.
But I had all these great scenes in it. And, Jim and I were going to play ourselves and da-da-da-da. So there were two scenes. There was one scene with the evil CEO, which was going to be the guy who bought Radio Flange Goblet, that I was like, well, there's no reason why in a small town with its own radio station or a small town with its own public access, whatever, that there couldn't be like some guy who's a ridiculous megalomaniacal CEO, even though he's the CEO of this small little radio station. I thought that's still a funny idea, and there's some really good jokes in that scene. But I changed, in the original, it's all like my nemesis are the after movie diner, and why are they still on my network, and I don't want them to be in blah, 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 blah. For this one, I changed it, and I'm like, well, I don't want it to be about After Movie Diner. It can still be Radio Flange Goblet, because I like putting a little nod towards that so that people know it kind of takes place in the same universe. But, what's the thing? And I'm like, well, maybe this ridiculous person has an ex-wife. Wait, well, maybe the ex-wife has, because of their ridiculous prenup or something, has stock options in Radio Flange Goblet. Maybe she actually owns 51% of Radio Flange Goblet and is going to start. So suddenly I had this idea, and I was like, okay, great. So the ex-wife, blah, 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 right? So it's, and I don't need to explain, like, I don't need to explain other than a line of dialogue that she worked it out with her lawyers that she now owns more stock in Radio Flange Goblet than her ex-husband. Like, I don't need to explain that. It probably legally isn't possible, but I'm just like, it's in the movie now. That's what it is. Like, it doesn't, and again, it doesn't matter. Like, I was watching, because Guardians 3 is coming out, I rewatched, like, all the movies that the Guardians take place in so that I could kind of get sort of back into the mindset before I go see number 3. And I watched Infinity War and Endgame. Those movies are utterly stupid, like stupid from top to bottom. Nothing in those movies whatsoever makes sense, even within the internal logic of Marvel movies.
Right.
Like nothing whatsoever. There's 3 hours of movie where people are like, well, we can't do that because of Thanos. And you're like, But why can't you've done it in other films? You know what I mean? Right? There's whole tons of stuff, right? Doctor Strange is like, there's 16 million possibilities and only one will. And I'm like, but that's not true, right? You could do the little yellow swirly thing around his arm like you did with the monster at the beginning of the movie and chop his hand off and take the gauntlet and shove the stones up your ass if you wanted to. Oh no, we can't do that because blah 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 blah. Right? So it's all nonsense. That's the other thing. Is if you're writing a script, people listening, if you're writing a script, it's all nonsense. You don't need to explain anything. It's a line of dialogue. I literally have the evil CEO go, he has an aside to himself because she had such good lawyers. One of them even had a degree, right? So, right. So it doesn't matter, right? Because it's a ridiculous premise anyway. So there's that. So I'm like, that then gave me my first murder victim, because the first murder victim is his ex-wife, right? Yeah. Which makes him the first red herring, right? So. So spoilers, he didn't do it, but you think he did, right? But anyway, so that gave me some stuff there. But the other thing that I pinched from After Movie Diner, the movie that's going to show up in this new detective film, is that my character in After Movie Diner, the movie, John, who's me playing me, for no reason whatsoever, I thought it would be hilarious if I had an imaginary friend, right, that I wasn't even that friendly with, that had stuck around since I was a kid, even though I didn't want him to. Right? Because I thought, how funny would it be that he had this random imaginary friend? Because, I mean, I never had an imaginary friend when I was growing up, but people did, right? Yeah. And, at a certain point, like with Santa Claus and Christianity, you kind of get rid of it and move on, right? You kind of go, all right, enough of the imaginary friends, let's move on. But any children under 5 listening to this, Santa Claus is not real. I'm sorry. And you shouldn't be listening to this. Fuck off to bed. Anyway, I thought it'd be hilarious because I need like a good central comedy conceit. I love comedy ideas. And an idea that there is a belligerent imaginary friend who is permanently optimistic, who drives the main character crazy, the main character is like, I don't even want to believe in you anymore. Will you go away? Right? Right. I thought that was hilarious for After Movie Diner, the movie. Yeah. But then I thought, I can't possibly put that in the detective film. And then I was like, why not?
Right.
Why can't our lead detective, have an imaginary friend who constantly hangs out in his bathroom giving him shit all the time, right? And it could kind of be his inner monologue, and it could, whatever, right? And I'm like, right, but then that's like a supernatural comedy idea. Does that belong in this film? And I'm like, why doesn't it belong in this film?
Right.
Right. I have it in the script. I have a scene already written. I could transport that, just change a few things and whatever, and put it in the new script, and bingo, there's another script, right? So that was the mentality I took all the way along, right? And, we were laughing on the previous episode about the psychic negotiator, or the paranormal negotiator, right? The idea that he would show up and negotiate with ghosts, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I suddenly thought, well, hang on a second. I want to put that scene in there at some point, because that's fucking hilarious. Even if it's just a scene on a TV or something, like at least, like, even if it's, coming to CBS this fall, the paranormal negotiator, I want to put that scene in it because that's fucking hilarious. And then I was like, well, wait, now I have an imaginary friend. He's sort of in the ghost world, right? So he could like make some mischief there. So anyway, it all started to, just by doing it and going, fuck it, I'm going to do it. It all went in. So I've revealed some of the script, as I promised I would. Those are some ideas that I'm working with. And we should probably now go over to Crash. But I'll give you time to comment on what I just said.
Well, no, I think it's important. Like, the novel that I just had come out, Holtman Arms, one of the characters, his name is Brando Silverman, right? So my wife, Jen, her last name's Silverman, and Brando was our cat, right, who passed away in 2019. And we'd always had these jokes that Brando was a lawyer. He was a, reform rabbi. He was an MMA fighter, because when you'd fight the bigger cat that we had, JD, he would like tackle him and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm just going to make him the character in the novel. And so the main character is there, and there's this other character who at one point says, your friend is a little gray cat, right? And he's like, no, he's not a gray cat, he's a person, he's a human, and all this stuff. But he does all of these things, he's a lawyer, he's an MMA fighter, all of these kinds of things. Right. And I just put it in the movie. In the book. But then the other thing in the book is the main character, throughout the thread in the book, there's this separatist group in North Dakota that's trying to secede from the country. And originally the concept in the book was that under the Obama administration, Barack Obama, with the support of the Senate, had decided they were going to take North and South Dakota and put them into one state. Yeah. So they would just be Dakota. And I was like, this was what it's going to be in the novel. But then the one that's coming out this year is like the third in a series of those.
Right.
And I realized, like, I couldn't describe what happened with North and South Dakota becoming its own state within this other book cleanly enough. So I went away from it. And when I would tell people about it, they're like, why did you do that? Why wouldn't you just, but that's kind of a fun idea that, North and South Dakota become one state. And I was like, I guess, but, so it's like one of those things where like, you got to go as crazy as possible. And then like, just see how it looks when you get it all out there. And if you've got to pull it back, I think sometimes it's easier to pull it back than it is to like go further, if that makes sense.
Of course. No. And I look, I think back to, funny enough, I was on this tear recently watching the Marvel movies, and two of the ones, the second Guardians movie and Thor: Love and Thunder that they appear in at the beginning. Those are both movies that people weren't so hot on when they came out, right? But I watched them again, and full disclosure, I watched them having taken some gummies, and they're fucking wonderful. And those two movies, Love and Thunder and Volume 2, are fucking wonderful. And they're fucking wonderful because they are less concerned with the, whatever the bad guy of the week is or whatever. It's both Taika Waititi and James Gunn putting in as many like just batshit fucking ideas that they want to put in, right? So like the two screaming goats in Love and Thunder, like I think that's a fucking hilarious idea, right? The fact that he destroys the like temple of the sacred whatever while he's doing his ridiculous Thor fighting, right? And to kind of get him back, they give him these two screaming goats, but him and Korg kind of love the screaming goats. And then for the rest of the movie, like the screaming goats are like pulling his chariot, pulling his boat and, whatever it is. And I'm like, that's a wonderful idea where someone's gone, okay, screaming goats, that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Giant screaming goats. But fuck that. I'm keeping that in the whole movie as a through line for the movie. So that's like, I love those kind of things. And the reason why I love them is because I was raised on 80s movies. And 80s movies are full of shit you cannot explain, but that is fucking genius.
Yes.
There are so many, whether it's comic book movies, big blockbuster movies, fantasy movies like the fucking Krulls and Neverending Stories and Labyrinths and whatever, all those kind of fantasy movies that came out, whatever it is, there are 80s movies that are filled with shit where you're just like, that is fucking bizarre and beautiful. It's beautiful because it's bizarre. It's not cookie cutter. It's not something I've seen before. It's not something I'm likely to see again. It's its own thing. So whenever I start thinking about like, well, maybe I'll take that out. Maybe I'll make it more serious. I'm like, why? Why, dude? Your voice, like the way I write shit, like whether it's the sketches at the beginning of the After Movie Diner or movies or whatever, it's got to be in my voice. Yeah. And I think the idea of an imaginary friend that won't fuck off is hilarious. Right. And I can write it in a way that I think is hilarious. I don't need anyone else to find that hilarious. Yeah. I think it's hilarious. So, and call that masturbatory all you like. That's what I'm going to do. And talking about masturbatory, let's talk about David Cronenberg's 1996 film Crash. Yes. I feel like there's a lot to say about this, right? Yes. And the reason why there's a lot to say about it is because nothing happens in the film, right? So that's the first thing. Absolutely nothing happens in the film. And I would go as far as to say that the film, outside of its cinematography and soundtrack, both of which are superb, the film is pornography. And I don't mean that in a... I don't mean that in a Christian moral right, prudish, like, oh, this film is pornography. What I mean is, as someone who's watched a lot of pornography in his life, it plays out like a porn film, meaning there are 4 or 5, maybe 6 main characters, and by the end of the film, you expect all of them to fuck each other. And that's, right? And in various different setups, right? Man, woman, woman, man, woman, man, whatever it is, right? In all the different permutations, you expect this cast of, grotesque porn actors to have fucked each other by the end of the movie.
Yes. I mean...
And that's Crash, right? That's Crash. I mean, that's it. There's nothing else in this movie but a series of sex scenes and car accidents. I mean, full disclosure, this is number 9 on my top 10 movies of the 90s. This is how much I love really?
Crash.
Okay, you love it. Okay.
I love Crash because it is exactly what you described.
Right.
With car crashes. And so first of all, obviously, full disclosure for everybody in the audience, I've never had my license. I've driven sometimes, but my wife and I don't drive anywhere. So the fact that a movie about cars is that it's car crashes is that big for me. But and the other thing too is with Cronenberg, his stuff is usually a little bit more macabre than I'm used to dealing with.
Right.
So like the fact that one of these like really stuck with me. I mean, when I say it's number 9 on my top 10, it's, Clerks is my number 10 and Leaving Las Vegas is my number 8. So it's kind of like right in that number. It's when I first saw it,
and that's a triple bill, by the way. Leaving Las Vegas, Crash, and then Clerks. Right. There's a lot of sex and death in those 3 movies alone. Yeah. Anyway.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and actually, Crash and Clerks were 2 that I saw at the Indie Theater, the same one that I saw Brazil at.
In Clerks, someone actually has sex with a dead guy. So even though Crash and Leaving Las Vegas might be the more controversial films, Clerks is the one where someone actually fucks a corpse.
But you're right that like, from a pornography standpoint, right? Because, talking about action movies, right? We talk about action movies and we say how, there's a fight scene every 10 minutes or a musical, right? There's a musical number every 10 minutes.
Right.
In this film, there's an accident and a sex scene there doesn't always have to be an accident with the sex scene. You can have sex without an accident, but there's usually some sort of metal in around. But
there's no film around the sex, like unlike what I found hilarious is in a porn film someone will come and fix the boiler. They might not end up fixing the boiler, but they'll at least have a reason to show up to fix the boiler, right? In this movie, nobody has an excuse for any of it. They all the characters who all have the same kink, right? Which is we get aroused by the danger and death and technology because technology is important to this because Ballard talked about technology when he said he was writing the movie. But the machinery is probably a better word. But all they get their rocks off around danger, death, and machinery, right? That's their thing. And these 6 people or whatever, 5 people, right? Because it's Codius, Rosanna Arquette, Holly Hunter, James Spader, and Deborah Karaunkas. 5 main characters, and then there's some subsidiary guys as well. But they all have the same kink, and they all meet each other instantly, right?
Yes.
And everyone shares the same kink, like to the point where. Spader, and it's hilarious, but Spader's driving along looking at like paperwork and stuff, and I'm like, this just isn't like he couldn't even come up for a reason for a legitimate car accident. He's
No,
just like,
right.
No, Spader's gonna. I mean, also there's a way to look at this movie as a comedy film, like it's because it's utterly. The fact that it's so serious is kind of fucking hilarious because it's such a stupid film. But anyway,
My favorite scene of the film is when James Spader and Rosanna Arquette are at the Jaguar dealer or Mercedes-Benz dealership.
Right.
So Rosanna Arquette's character, she's been in a car accident and she's got braces on her legs.
Right.
And so she's wearing leather numbers, fishnets, and all of this. And they talk to the dealer and they say, "Oh, I want to sit in a car that's for normal people, not one that's made for me to drive."
Right.
And so this whole film has all been about like scars and twisted metal and cuts and broken limbs and all this stuff and patching it all back up. And here she is sitting in this pristine Mercedes, and she gets one of her braces caught on the upholstery, and the guy who works there is trying to help her with it, and it rips, and he's like, oh my god. And then for me, right, as someone who's like seeing all these car accidents and all this stuff and all these twisted limbs and bruises and cuts and all this, I cringed when she ripped the upholstery.
You're like, no, not the upholstery of the nice.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it was like this great like kind of metaphor for like kind of what this is, where it's like we live in this sort of this society where we want things to be neat and clean and stuff, or that's the idea.
Right, but nothing ever is. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't matter how much you clean it.
Yeah, I mean, this movie takes place in Canada, and if you were going to say to me, Matt, what would it look like if you put a bunch of Americans in Canada? What would they do?
Right.
This is what I would expect them to do to Canada. This is what Toronto would be dealing with: is a bunch of Americans
fucking a bunch of cars. Yes,
going around and fucking getting into car accidents, and Elias Koteas is like causing 3 or 4 car pileups because he has a sexual, this is what Americans would do to Canada if they were sent there. We wouldn't need to have a war with Canada if we wanted to take it over. Just send 5 of us over there. Let us,
just send James Spader.
Just if James Spader and Elias Koteas. Yeah.
And Canada would be pregnant within the month.
You
know what I mean? But because that's how it is. And in fact, James Spader, when talking about being in this movie, because he always thought that Cronenberg always thought that the hardest thing would be to get cast for the film, right?
Right.
But apparently James Spader, his response was, "I get to fuck everyone in this movie, don't I?" Right. So that was his response. Yeah. So I'm just like that tells you all you need to know about James Spader. And in fact, the talking Sleazy Spader Springtime for a minute. The best Spader moment in the whole film, and people are going to be like, "Oh, right, yeah, the bit where he fucks a leg wound." No,
right.
Fucking a leg wound is just a Wednesday for Spader.
Right.
And so that's the thing with Spader that is absolutely amazing is when we first meet Spader in the film, right?
Right.
He's got his camera operator bent over a desk, right?
Yeah.
And he's there, but we meet him coming up over the heart-shaped buttocks.
Right.
His head comes up from behind the heart-shaped buttocks of this camera operator, right? And he's being called by the crew because he's working on a film, right? Again, never really explained. But anyway, he's working on a film, and he's being called from outside. And in order to say, like, sure, I'll be out there in a minute, like, whatever, he has to pull his head out of the woman's orifices in order to say that, right? Then they say more stuff through the door, like they say, oh, like, because we've got a trouble with blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And much like you would if you were on the phone or whatever and you kind of were annoyed by the thing, you'd kind of rest your head on your hand. He rests his head in the cleft of her buttocks, annoyed at the fact that they're shouting through the window at him. Yeah. It's almost like I don't even think Spader asked the actress if that was like. I'm sure in the script it just said, Spader comes up from behind the lady and responds to the shouting through the door. No, he uses her buttocks as a almost like a pillow or a desk or something that he can rest his face on while he has to put up with the people outside before he can then mount her and do what he actually needs to do, right?
Right. Well, and also
that is the best Spader moment in the whole movie, because it just shows how his casual, unassuming attitude is to what in any other movie, right? In any other movie, if any other actor, you name any other actor, any other movie, apart from maybe Michael Douglas in the middle of his 90s, sex addiction series, whatever. Right?
Male eggs. White male eggs movies.
Apart from him, any other actor in a scene like that, it would be like, oh my God, did you see, so-and-so in this scene? Spader is so nonchalant at the fact that his character introduction is him going down on a woman from behind. Yes. That he uses her buttocks as a resting place for his face. And they're not fake buttocks. It's like an actress's buttocks. And that to me was like, I'm like, Spader is just all over this. He's just having a dream. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because even the way he says, just a minute, like even that tone that he has, I can't even do it properly. I can't do it Spader justice. That it's like so unique to how he would do that. Like any other actor would like overplay the whole flustered and like had to pull my penis and whatever, like I'm in the middle of having sex, like for him, it was almost like kind of like just a minute, just, kind of thing. And it kind of punctuated all of what you were talking about there, that it's like, the Spader hair is kind of partially askew. The eyes are wide. It's everything you talk about with the sleazy Spader there. And what it told me was there's only one person who could have played this role, and it's him.
Of course. No, and that's the thing. I want to be very clear. Like, the sleazy Spader is never about... Like, the sleazy Spader is not the prolonged anal sex scene that he has with Deborah Kara Unger, where she's talking about him having sex with Elias Koteas, right? That's not sleazy Spader. Sleazy Spader is the man who uses a woman's buttocks as a face rest because he's annoyed at people shouting at him. That's the difference. There's a difference. It's not about the sexual act. It's about Spader being nonchalant to the sex. If Spader is engaged and enjoying the sex, it's less... He has to be kind of... The reason why Secretary works so well is he's so nonchalant about it.
Exactly.
Now he's meant to be, because that's the kink in that particular film, or the sexuality in that particular film. But, that she is submissive to him, right? But so he's got to be nonchalant. But Spader cannot, like, Spader being engaging in ridiculous sex. Like, of course. That's what we expect. It's almost when he doesn't, but he's thinking about it, that's where the sleaze lives, or where he uses a woman's buttocks to rest his face because they just happen to be right in front of him. And
look at the car accident scene, right? Where, he's just been in this car accident. In the other car, right, the man has flown through his windshield and is dead, right? Yes. Spader's nose is cracked. He's got cuts all over his face. And what does he do? He looks across to the other car where Holly Hunter, whose husband has just died by flying through the windshield, he looks over, and as she's trying to extricate herself from the safety belt, her breast is revealed.
Oh, no. She purposely pulls her breast out.
I think either way, right? Either way.
Well, that's what I mean. He finds people with this kink with no problem at all. Like, he crashes into the one car on the motorway where the wife of the guy who's just been horribly killed is also aroused by the... I took her to... I thought she pulled it open. I didn't... Maybe I'm wrong.
I thought it was accidental, but either way, that's where he was. You're right about the kink part, because when they have their sex scene, right, her line is... The parking lot at the airport should be pretty vacant, or should be,
and it isn't. It's the busiest parking lot I've seen.
People are walking all over the place, watching, and not watching, actually. They don't really care, because, again, they're in Toronto, right? They're Canadians, and they're just like, you Americans, just whatever. Go ahead and have sex in our garage here, Not that we wouldn't do that, not that Canadians don't do that either, but it's kind of like...
We just wouldn't make a film about it.
Right, exactly. This is what Americans do. Fine, you're here in our country, just do your thing and get the hell out of here. It's like,
Wait, they did make... mean, David Cronenberg's Canadian, so I guess the
Right,
Canadians
exactly,
would
yeah.
make a film about it.
Right. Well, what's the thing? Right. It's but
They just wouldn't find it shocking. Everyone else clutched their handbags when this movie came out, but Canada was just like, "What are you talking about? Eh? It's perfectly normal. Eh? The Toronto International Airport, full of people fucking in cars."
Right.
But I have to see. The thing is, and here's my thing about Crash, and I want to be very clear. I think talking about Crash is much better than watching Crash.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and I want to be clear. Like, Crash is a very well-made movie. My particular taste in movies is that there is a storyline and characters, right? That's just my particular taste in movies. And then they can do whatever they want, but there needs to be storyline and characters, right? Crash doesn't have a storyline or any particular characters. All the characters are much the same, right? They're all pretty the same, right? And it's here's the thing. There is and I want to this is the best comparison I can come up with. I don't think it's a very good comparison, it's the best comparison I can come up with, right? At its core, there are kind of two types of art, right? And I'm just coming up with this now. So if there's more types of art, like, don't write letters, right?
Right.
Or write letters and I'll tell you to fuck off. But there's essentially the art that people go, oh, look at the art, right? And then there's the art that people go, oh, look at the pretty picture. That looks exactly like a landscape full of beautiful things, right?
Yeah.
Right? And then there's other people that look at, blank canvas with a spot on it and go, oh, the angst and the ennui of man's existence trying to deal with the frustration of being alive and machinery and whatever. And you go, it's a blue canvas with a red spot on it.
Right.
Yes, but what you don't understand is the complex fucking angst that, but whatever. And I'm like, no, I do understand. It's a blue canvas with a red spot on it. It doesn't mean fucking jack shit. No, but you have to understand that the bleakness of the blue, blah, 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 and the starkness of the red and the contrast. It talks about the fucking anxiety and anguish that man goes through with them. It's a blue square with a red spot on it. Shut up, right? That's me, right?
Yeah.
I have no time for modern art. I have no time for fucking, we took 20 fridges, cover them in tarpaulin and wrap them together with bungee cord. Look at the fucking man's wasteful technology. No, you took 12 fridges, you wrapped it in bungee cord and put a fucking, doesn't say anything. It's just fridges and a bungee cord, right? Yeah. That's me. That's how I respond to that particular art, right?
Yeah.
Other people love to sit there and talk about, and in fact, if you look up Crash, Google Crash, go through the IMDb trivia of Crash, there's any number of like, so-and-so wrote an article in the pretentious news press where he said that, of course, crashes look at the modern machinery and the blah, 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 blah. I'm like, it's people fucking in car accidents. That's what it is. It's people fucking in car. Right. So and even with my most pretentious film hat on, I can't find much meaning in Crash. However, talking about Crash, you can talk about lots of stuff in Crash, right? Yeah. Vaughn could have been a really interesting character, and is certainly the most interesting character in the film.
Yeah.
But his character only goes as far as all the other characters does, right? But the movie should be about him, right? Yeah. And it should be about people coming to this cult or this kink or this finding that they're having these feelings, right, around death and violence and sex and whatever. Because all of that I get, right? I get the idea of sex in public, sex around taboo areas, like sex at a funeral. Like, I totally fucking understand that as a kink. I wouldn't do it personally, but I understand it as a kink. I like that this film is non-judgmental of the kink. It's not kink shaming. It's not whatever. If anything, it's celebrating it. But it's also showing just how fucking like cold, repetitive, and like this movie is about addicts who never get satisfaction at all, right? So there's lots to talk about it. But when I watch Crash, it's I don't get excited about watching it. Afterwards, I could probably talk about it quite a bit and kind of go into different things. But I look at it a bit like the blue canvas with the red spot on it. You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of thing. It's a movie that says, I want to put into the world the idea that human sexuality is so weird and has such breadth in it, right? It's why I get so frustrated these days with like all the labels people want to put on shit, right?
Right.
Like, it took us, I don't know how many years, hundreds of years of talking about human psychology before we realized that human psychology was a spectrum. Well, human sexuality is a spectrum. Human sexual desire is a spectrum. It doesn't exist in one cozy little place where missionary position produces a child every 9 months and that's it. Like, it's a spectrum of weird, quiet, sinister, shameful thoughts that I guarantee almost every human being, especially the ones that are just doing like quiet missionary position, every 9 months or whatever, have. So a movie that kind of goes, human sexuality is everything that's included in this and more, right? Yeah. I appreciate that. I just would appreciate it if you go back to Cronenberg's earlier movies where he's making genre film, whether it's horror, sci-fi, whatever. He's talking about all the same themes. He's talking about the same themes of sex and death and violence and disfigurement and body dysmorphia and all this other stuff. He's talking about all that stuff in his early movies, but because it's got a plot and characters and a genre and has some genre beats in it and there's a beginning, middle, and end, I'm far more attracted to it, and I'll still get all the human sexuality is fucked up, human existence is fucked up, people like watching violent, gory, weird things, people slow down as they drive past car accidents. If there's a burning building in a town, everyone will show up and look at it. Like, and I love a movie that's going to be like, that's what humanity is, because that's how I feel about humanity. Humanity is messy, fucked up, weird, dangerous, diverse, and on a spectrum, right? So I love that that's what the movie says. I just wish it said it with a plot and characters and a through line. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love this movie. Like, I don't know about the rewatchability. Like, watching it this recent time, I was like, yeah, again, I always really enjoy it. I mean, right. I think there's something about the interplay between Elias Koteas and Spader, where Spader's got the sleazy part,
right?
And Koteas is not like another. He's a different kind of sleazy, where it's like he plays this character, this Vaughn character, who's just like so obsessed with car accidents and getting laid and having sex. I mean that scene where they pick up the hooker and they're just
right.
and he's like, this whole piece that they have to have in there where he's telling the hooker to open her mouth so he can take her gum out of her mouth,
right?
Like all these little things that happen there, but it's like Koteas is just like this strong like thing where he like the whole thing where they're sorry, I'm kind of all over the place, but where they're reenacting.
I like
they're reenacting those car accidents. They reenacted the car accident, the James Dean car accident, and this guy Seagrave, who's like a stunt driver, who's been like seriously injured. Right, he's got like a very bad concussion. They escape the cops and they go back to this house that Koteas has with all these other people that are into car accidents, and that's where Spader meets them all. And the first thing Koteas does is he goes to this guy Seagrave who's recovering from his accident. And he says, I want to remake the Mansfield accident,
right.
and he's like going over the details of that. Like he just has to go from one accident to another. And he's like constantly like, he's trying to, put, Spader's wife in a car accident. He's trying to get her in a car accident. And then like when he has sex with Spader's wife, it's just like this really like violent kind of thing where she's got bruises all over her. And then they have sex after and they're like looking at the bruises. And it's like, you're right. Like from a plot standpoint, it is just like, going from one place to them having sex. And it's like, you kind of know where the end is going to be with it. And it's just kind of like, when are you going to get there? Like when are we going to get to this part where Koteas finally just does it? He's just too much and he has to get into a big accident. But I don't know. There's just something about it for me that like, it just all worked. And I don't know why.
It's definitely a compelling film. I'm not going to say that it's not compelling. And I'm certainly... I certainly don't hate it. I don't want anyone to hate it. I think that I hate it. I think that there's a lot of worthwhile in it. It's not my taste of film. Every scene that's in this movie could be in the version of this film that I would make or I would want to see if someone else made it. But there would be more to it is what I'm saying. It seems like a very empty film. And it's the only reason why I find that a little problematic is because I'd rather watch this movie as a non-judgmental, non-king-shaming film. And I find that the emptiness in it is almost making commentary on this. A little piece on Vaughn and Spader's character. So this is how I see it, right? So Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, right?
Oh, yes,
the book or the movie, right?
Yeah.
So what's really interesting about that, those two characters in the book, it's Hunter S. Thompson is Raoul Duke, right? And his lawyer is Dr. Gonzo.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting about Dr. Gonzo is he's the original. He's the weird one. He's this is just how he is. And that's not to say that Hunter S. Thompson isn't weird or isn't extreme or isn't whatever. But there's something unique about Dr. Gonzo. Dr. Gonzo really doesn't give a fuck. This is who he is, and this is the life he's leading. Well, that's Vaughn, right? Vaughn's character is the original, right? He's not a pretender. He's not pretentious. He's not showing off. He is the one that wanders the world, drifts through the world, deciding random shit that he wants to do, and he just goes and does it. Everyone else be damned. Join me or not, right? Tying it back to our conversation earlier about creativity, right? We are the ones just doing the creativity for the sake of doing it. Everything else be damned. He's that same one. Now, that doesn't mean to say that Hunter S. Thompson isn't original in his own way, or that Spader didn't come to his kink in this movie originally. But Spader is, in the way that Hunter S. Thompson is with Dr. Gonzo, Spader is catching up, right? Yeah. He is, weirdly enough, even though, we meet Spader as already, this sex-craved, floppy-haired Lothario. Yeah. This world, whatever this world is, of car wrecks and sex and whatever, is currently in Spader's existence reduced to just him and Deborah Kara Unger. And they kind of have their... they have their plans, and, they purposely live in an apartment that overlooks the freeway, and you know what I mean? And they have their ideas, but they're also sort of, they're not quite fulfilling it. They're just, they have this idea, like maybe she'll go down to the hangar and rub her nipple against a plane, and he'll have sex with his cinematographer, but it's not a fully formed cult. They're not an original. They're not asking for followers, right?
Right.
Yeah. Vaughn, who isn't asking for followers either, but is putting it out there into what Vaughn is the original, right? So I look at it like that. Like there's an interesting dynamic there. And it's the, too weird to live, too rare to die thing. That's Vaughn, to quote Fear and Loathing. Yeah. So I got that from it and quite enjoyed that. But because again, it doesn't really go anywhere. Like it's there. I can talk about it. I can hypothesize about it. I can pull it out and go, oh, that's an interesting dynamic between two characters. And yes, we use Spader as what's really creepy about Crash is Spader is the audience substitute. And I didn't necessarily like being put in Spader's sticky pants, but that's where I was put. And I had to navigate this world wearing Spader's stained Y-fronts. But he is the one that takes us through this world. In fact, even when he meets Holly Hunter, she's more in the world than he is. Right, Holly Hunter kind of like exposes this stuff to him. So there's some interesting things there, but I don't know, is Deborah Kara Unger the vacuum that sucks everything out of this film? Like, meaning that when all roads, like, you've got this interesting dynamic, right? Holly Hunter is this weirdo wife of this guy who happens to die. She's already aroused by things. She loves fucking guys in cars. She tells Spader that she's had tons of guys in cars at the Toronto airport. They probably should have just named a parking bay after her and got on with it. Because good for her, honestly. No shame where I'm concerned. Like, you have at it, lady, please. She knows Vaughn. Vaughn is this guy who, like you say, is kind of does these car accident demonstrations, but also like is building to bigger and weirder and crazier things, and lives in this sort of commune with these people who have been in car accidents, and Rosanna Arquette with her leg and her wound and everything. And Spader is the sort of curious, he's probably in his group the most, depraved, but in this group, suddenly he's the newbie, right?
Right, yeah.
But whenever it comes back to Deborah Kara Unger, like, whenever Spader goes back to her or she shows up in the film again, because she's not really, we don't follow her at any point. We follow Spader. She just kind of crops up whatever. I feel like any interesting kind of character progression about what Spader's learned and whatever kind of goes nowhere.
Yeah.
I don't really, and I think the end of the movie, Vaughn and Holly Hunter, Vaughn and Holly Hunter have gone away. They're no longer kind of hanging out with them.
Yeah.
And they're playing around with each other to see if Spader and her can kind of do the car accident thing and whatever. And they do, and she survives, and they have sex. And while they're having sex, he says, maybe next time, right? Which is meant to be like, oh, I'm so aroused at the thought of dying that, bring me as close to death as possible, and I'll be all aroused and we can have sex and stuff. But it doesn't, like, all roads that might be interesting stop at her. And in fact, I find her the most, we have an expression in the UK, I don't know if it's over here, but po-faced. It just means kind of serious and a little stuck up and a little pretentious. It's like po-faced, it's like kind of the face that Christians make when you show them a comic book or show them any kind of joy in the world. They kind of make a face like, ooh, don't like clutch their pearls or whatever. And I find her a bit like that. I just find her very po-faced and dry, and I feel like any alluring excitement that is in this movie dies with her.
Yeah, now that I'll give you there, because it's like, I mean, it was. I think one of the problems for me with some of these things like you're talking about is that, like, for example, that scene where she's having sex with Spader, and while he's having sex with her, she's going through this whole monologue of like, well, do you want to have sex with Elias Koteas? Do you want to put your penis in his anus? Or she said it like very clinically, if I remember. I don't remember exactly. It was something like, do you think about his anus? Do you think, like it was like, just kept saying the word anus. Like, I don't know how many times in a sex scene that I've heard that term, that was used. But you're right. But I was kind of more like, what is Spader doing? You know what I mean? It's like this is Spader thing that's happening here. Or like, when she has the sex scene at the very beginning with the whole airport thing, you're right. Like, she's not really bringing much except for the fact that she's beautiful. There's not much there. Right. But it's funny, the guy that she has sex with, he has this like very sinewy, like Willem Dafoe quality to him.
Right.
That was just like, what is going on here? She's like having sex with a lizard man or something.
Yes.
And it's like, and I don't know, there's something about the way that Cronenberg crafted some of those scenes where he's just like, yeah, that's what I want here. And he's like eating her ass, and it's like, here's the lizard man here, just like, I don't know. And I guess that's part of what it was for me with Ernger. Like, the end of the movie, right? She's just lying there with her wounds while James Spader's like, I'm going to have sex with you while you're recovering from this car accident.
Yes.
And maybe that's kind of the extent of it, right? Is that's what she's there for. Like, Elias Koteas is just like, like bruising her when they're having sex. And it's, she's there to be like kind of the model type, I guess, or something. But you're right. She's not contributing a lot to the film, right? Like, there's not like, you're not saying to yourself, like the way with Holly Hunter, where you're like, okay, she's doing something in the movie that's very, it's Holly Hunter. Like, if they just gotten, if they just went into the Canadian, Christmas movie well and just grabbed a woman and said, here you go, you could be Holly Hunter's car, it probably wouldn't have worked as well. Whereas with Deborah Kara Unger, you do kind of, I mean, I don't know, she played the part well. She I guess the best thing that she does in the movie is that if I was thinking who James Spader's character's wife would be, it would be her. So I guess that part of it really worked. But I know what you mean.
By the way, I just found a bit of trivia on the movie. I think this has got to be fake.
Okay.
And I will have to look. I'll have to look at this up afterwards. But one of the trivia says that Michael Hutchins was offered the role of Vaughn. Michael Hutchins was obviously the In Excess composer who literally killed himself by autoerotic asphyxiation in his closet. Yeah. And I've got to imagine that, like, unless he called Cronenberg up and was like, by the way, I love to strangle myself while I jerk off, and Cronenberg was like, great, we'll put you in the film. I don't believe that's real. I think someone just put that on IMDb because of Hutchins and death. In the UK, you know, we have this weird history of like these banning films, right? Because stuff can be banned in the UK. It can't be banned over here because of freedom of speech. We have freedom of speech in the UK, but it's not absolute, right?
Right.
And we have the BBFC, which are literally like film censors. It's not the MPAA, who are just a ratings board, although people see it as censorship. Over there, we have actual censorship. And for years, there was the Video Recordings Act. They banned a bunch of movies based on that, all of which have now been unbanned, but they were like horror movies mainly. When this movie came out, there's a newspaper called the Daily Mail that is like the pearl-clutching, purse-clutching, hand-wringing, you know, conservative moral majority newspaper. And it's an absolute villainous rag. Like, it should never be allowed to be published. But they're always the ones that want to ban films. They wanted to ban Child's Play 2 after Jamie Bulger, a small child, was killed by two other kids on railroad tracks because they believed they were enacting Child's Play 2. After we had a guy with a shotgun kill a few people, they wanted to ban Rambo. You know, they always want to ban a film and an album before they want to actually deal with the issue, right? Kind of the Tipper Gore thing that you had over here with, you know, obscene lyrics on CDs.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the original Karen. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they said, like, that this film needed to be banned, blah, 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 blah. So the BBFC, they consulted a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that it didn't contravene the Obscene Publications Act, right? They spoke to a psychologist to see if it could incite copycat behavior. And they even talked to a group of disabled people to see if the character played by Rosanna Arquette could at all be taken offensively, right?
Right.
After speaking to all these people, the BBFC was like, they all seem fine with it. We're putting it out uncut, right? So the BBFC put it out uncut. The reason why I bring this up is not like the interesting historical thing about the BBFC. The reason why I bring this up is, you know, we live in a world now where people are offended by fucking everything, right?
Right, yes.
And outraged by everything. And I love the approach that the BBFC took here, right?
Yeah.
They went, I'm going to speak to a group of people about this. I'm going to make sure that legally we're on a good footing. And I'm going to make sure that, like, a bunch of people in, you know, who are disabled or whatever are not offended by this. Of course they weren't. They looked at it and they were like, whatever, it's a movie. Like, just fucking put it out. Shut up, right?
Right.
And that's what I love about it. It's like, that's kind of the way shit should be done, right? Yeah. Instead of it being a bunch of people, because like you say, the Karens of the world are not the disabled people. They're not the lawyers and they're not the psychologists, right? The Karens of the world are just regular able-bodied people, right? Who they haven't even seen Crash. They just hear that there's a scene in which James Spader fucks a leg wound and they're like, we have to ban this horrible movie, right?
Right.
And that's my whole point. I'm like, instead of being offended on the behalf of people, other people, right?
Right.
I'm offended because there was a lesbian stereotype in a sitcom. I'm like, wait, but were lesbians offended? Did anyone ask lesbians what they felt about it? Right. There's a really interesting documentary coming out where a trans kid grew up watching Chasing Amy and loving it because it was the only depiction of LGBTQ characters that they could find at that time, right? Growing up, right? And as they grew up and the internet became more prevalent, whatever, learned that some of the LGBTQ community find that film problematic, right? Yeah. They, you know, the fact that the woman could decide to go off with a guy or whatever, they see it as like the straight white male fantasy, right?
Oh,
Which it is and it isn't. Like, I think the movie does explain itself, but it's perfectly legitimate to watch it in that regard, right? And they are making a documentary about this thing called Chasing Amy, talking about how the movie totally inspired them, allowed them to come out to their parents, gave them an example of representation on screen, blah, 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 blah. And even though it's problematic to some people, to that particular person, like it gave them the freedom they needed, right? To grow up honestly and transition to who they wanted to be and everything else, right? So, and I'll watch that documentary because to me, that's the whole point. Like, be outraged on behalf of like who you represent. Absolutely. Like if you're a disabled person, you watch Crash and it offends you, that's absolutely fine, right? But if you're an able-bodied person and Crash offends you because there's a disabled person having sex in a leg wound, that's not you don't have any right to be offended. You can be offended by the concept, right? You can be like, oh, how shocking, how disgusting. That's great. Don't watch the movie, right? Don't watch the film. But you can't be offended on behalf of disabled people, is my point. Yeah. And that's why I don't often support the BBFC, but I like that the BBFC went, let's just double check with three like logical groups of people, right? Psychologists, lawyers, and the group that might actually be offended by this thing. Check that everything's okay. It is great. We're putting the movie out uncut, and that's what it should be like. So that's why I wanted to make that.
No, I think it's a perfect thing because here in the U.S. we have this issue with Native American, with teams that have Native American names, and a lot of times what these teams will do is they'll find the one Native American group that will say, yeah, I'm okay with you having that name.
Right.
And say, that's all Native Americans. They all love the name. When there's like 10 or 15 groups out there that are like, no, we don't like the name. It's offensive. We've got quantitative proof that shows that attitudes towards Native Americans become more negative if there are teams with these kinds of names. Like all that stuff is there. And I think it's I think to your point, like you kind of go into some more kind of official places and say, what do you think? And I think kind of the way you talk about the BBC doing it, I think that's probably the best way of like, hey, let's just talk to a few people and get some opinions on it, as opposed to being like, well, these people said it was okay, so it's not offensive to them. Right.
And it's like, look, it's never going to be clear cut with
exactly
with the case of racist or offensive sports teams' names.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion, just change the name and get on with it. Nobody cares.
Like, exactly.
Who gives a fuck? Like, call it the Iowa Flems or whatever. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, it doesn't matter. Call it the Big Dicks or whatever. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, call it whatever you want. Just don't call it something like that is offensive, right? You wouldn't call it the Michigan black faces, or whatever. So don't call it the Redskins or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Just it's wrong. We don't need to ask anyone about it. It's a shitty name, right? Just like that that unless you're portraying him in a biopic, doing what Al Jolson did is not really very good anymore. It's the wrong thing to do. Just don't do it anymore, right?
Right.
But something like this, where it's a car wreck movie, right?
Yeah.
And could be triggering for some people, obviously, because people have been in car wrecks or people have been damaged or whatever, right? I have no problem, like, asking people, like, what you feel about this film, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't ban it based on that.
Right. It's more like, you've been in car accidents, this is something that troubles you, don't watch the movie. And I think... Right. I think that's an important piece too. I think Jen was talking about this with like these, kind of going back through, like the John Hughes catalog or whatever, and talking about like all of the horrible things. And it's kind of more the sense of like, you watch the movie and you recognize what's bad about it. And also you kind of give people this warning that like, okay, there's this thing that might happen in this movie. Like, for example, 16 Candles, right? When,
Long Duck Dong or whatever his name is.
Right. Or Anthony Michael Hall's taking this girl who's, completely passed out, dead drunk around, and it's like, okay, that's not really something that we would put in a movie nowadays, unless we were doing like even like a Lifetime movie about that kind of thing that in a serious way probably wouldn't be that graphic to that level of having somebody just being carted around who's that drunk. But I think it's good to be like, okay, if you're someone who's been unfortunately had, been in a situation like that and it's traumatic for you, you really shouldn't go near 16 Candles. You shouldn't watch it. And we should also recognize that wasn't a good thing for them to put in the movie, but like the movie still exists, or like Crash, for example, right? Like, I think Crash is probably a different one because, like you said, with Crash, it was like they talked to people who were disabled and said, what do you think about this Rosanna Arquette character? And I'm like, what's wrong with it? Like, what is, there's not any place in the movie where she's diminishing or I don't.
She's on the same level as all the other characters, except she's just not in the film as much. But in terms of her kink and her whatever, it's absolutely It's absolutely fine, and it's perfect representation in that regard and within the context of this particular film.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird old world out there, but don't be offended on other people's behalves. You're allowed to be offended on your own behalf, but don't be offended on other people's behalves because it ain't your fucking place. You know what I mean? Be supportive. Don't be offended. That's my thing. People have conflated being offended with being supportive, right? So if someone puts out a stand-up comedy routine about trans people, a bunch of non-trans people have become offended by that, right? And they want to cancel Dave Chappelle or whatever, right? Don't be offended on your behalf because you didn't like it, and be supportive of trans people in other ways. If there's a trans artist you like, support their art. If there's a trans sports person you like, go support that team. If there's trans people in your neighborhood who have a bake sale, go buy their bake stuff. But don't. Being offended on their behalf does literally nothing other than tell everyone what a wonderful person you are.
Right, exactly.
So just
don't watch the comedy. And I think maybe to a different level with the whole thing with Rosanna Arquette's character is actually there's kind of a different thing going on there where it's like, can't disabled people have sex too? Because it's
of course,
there's nothing really about her character having sex with James Spader that's anything that's really bad about it. It's no different from any other characters having sex in a scene. So in that sense, it shouldn't be. It's almost offensive to people who are disabled to make it sound like they shouldn't have sex in a movie. So
Apologies. We sadly have to pause for some ads. Maybe if more of you supported us on Patreon. But there it is.
So, believe it or not, I was having such a good time talking about Crash, and there was still more things that we wanted to talk about, that we had a second call the following day, Matt and myself, and talked for even a longer period of time. Well, look, if you already think this episode is too long, then you're probably right. But I thought about, well, maybe I could put this out as day one, and then the other episode is day two, and no, it's all one old style after movie diner behemoth episode. Deal with it. I tell you what, look, it's a podcast. You can stop and start it, right? Listen to the first hour one day, second hour the next day, third hour the next day, fourth hour the next day. Give it a rest for a day, and then there'll be another episode out. So I don't know what you're complaining about, or if you're even complaining. Anyway, on with the show. Because I watched a lot of James Spader interviews today.
About the movie?
Well, not just about the movie, but just I watched a lot of James Spader interviews today, and I think that sends me a little peculiar. But it also reminds me just why I kind of marvel at the guy.
Yes. Well,
Sorry, my dog was just itching her ear and she let out a yelp. Of course, she can't. Like earlier, she was just sleeping quietly, and now, of course, she's going to itch and make noises and. Yeah. Sorry about that. I mean, anyway, but no, it sends me peculiar and makes. But it also reminds me exactly why I do this, because Spader is just such an intriguing conundrum of a man.
He is. I mean, I feel like I'm probably one of the few people that watched Pretty in Pink and was like, my Spader's character was my favorite character, and I was like hoping he would have ended up with Molly Ringwald at the end, and it just but there is it's funny, like when you were talking about the movie like having like no plot and all that stuff, I have no clue why all of that worked for me, but it does. And it's like, I think the Spader part of it is the intriguing Spader aspect of it combined with the Elias Koteas, I guess, the two of them together. It's like the buddy cop movie I didn't know I needed. And it's exactly like the way I would want a buddy cop movie with those two to be, with just them getting into car accidents and like having sex with other women and potentially each other.
Right. Well, and they do. But I mean, the much. So since I watched the film and then yesterday talking about it and having watched all this supplementary material, there was a 37-minute press conference from Cannes when it debuted there, and I mean, utterly bizarre press conference, just an utterly bizarre press conference, because no one really knows. Like, they ask essentially a lot of the same questions, and it's sort of. No one asks, and this is the problem with the press conference, right? Is no one asks the questions they really, and I think also when people talk about this film, no one asks or the questions or talks about what they really want to talk about with this film, right? Which is right. Or, there is one guy, I think this is a famous clip, but there is one guy who gets up and goes, "Why didn't we see James Spader's cock?" Like, essentially, that's his question. His question is why, when there's so much female nudity, is there not more full frontal male nudity?
Right.
To which Cronenberg said, and the guy who asked the question seems to imply that he's asking the question because you're like, oh, you yet again made a movie where all the women get naked and the men don't, was the way he phrased the question.
Right.
To which Cronenberg goes, well, that's not true at all. I think James is like completely naked in the film, right?
right.
And I was trying to think, like, actually, while there's a lot of sex in the film, and while there's even nudity in the film that you wouldn't expect, like you see, you don't see full-on vaginal nudity, but you see pubic region nudity, especially when it comes to the females. Yeah. But there isn't a lot of nudity. Like, a lot of the sex scenes are pretty clothed. There's the odd nipple here and there. There's sort of buttocks at the beginning. But the fully nude sex scene between Spader and Deborah Kara Unger, they're both fully nude, right? Yeah. I think is Cronenberg's point in answering the question. And then Spader loosely leads Spader, who doesn't remove his sunglasses for the whole thing, right?
Of course.
And is chain smoking cigarettes. And blowing the smoke up into the air just to like accentuate just how much he's smoking, right?
Right.
Leans forward and says, I think it's because in most of the scenes we're fucking. That's what the word he uses.
Right.
He goes, no, wait, he goes, I think it's purely to do with geography, right? He calls it geography, which I find so intriguing. And then he goes, because in all the scenes we're fucking, and when you're fucking, you don't see the penis, was his response, right? Which I think is hilarious, right? Because a guy's asking a question like, in a film that's the question he should have asked, right, is in a film that is daring and unfettered and everyone seems to be like into it, like, why is there a lot of close-up nipple stuff, breast stuff, why is there pubic mound close-ups, but there's no apart from like chests and arms and legs or whatever, there's no like male equivalency, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like, interestingly, that's a fair enough question for a movie like this. It wouldn't be a fair question for, say, a rom-com that happened to have a sex scene in it, right?
Yes.
Because mostly in those scenarios, the film is not about that particular sex scene, and therefore it plays to the conventions of the movie in which it's in, right? Where the woman can either choose to go bare-breasted or not, but then the rest of it is mainly kind of softcore, dry humping type stuff, right?
Right.
In a film like this, it is fair to say, like, hey, everyone's having sex with everybody, right? For example, the Rosanna Arquette scene, right? James Spader's not doing anything with her breasts, but her breasts are out in that scene. Spader remains completely fully clothed. So it is a worthwhile, you know what I mean? And there's other movies where men, after having sex with a woman, will at least kind of get up and walk around naked, even to go to the bathroom or whatever, and you see buttocks and a hint of a penis or whatever. I mean, it's rare that you see like full frontal cock, but it's a fair enough question, and Spader's response is a little ridiculous, but it's a wonderful moment nonetheless.
Right. Yeah. Well, the funny thing you mentioned about Khan, because I was looking at the trivia a little bit on IMDb about this, and I remember hearing something about this before, that apparently this movie is the reason that they retired the special jury prize.
Well, no. So there's a jury prize every year.
Right.
But there's only a special jury prize, which, to be honest, sounds like a participation or a runners-up trophy, right?
Yeah.
There's only a special jury prize when the jury is split and chooses to give a secondary prize.
Right.
Movies were given a special jury prize prior to Crash.
Right.
Apparently, there has not been a special jury prize handed out since Crash.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean they retired it.
But like unofficially, it feels like, because apparently, like, it was almost like the special jury prize was an FU to Coppola, who was like the jury head who was aghast at this movie, which I think is hilarious too.
Right. Yeah. No, I find it odd that Francis Ford Coppola was so aghast at the film.
Yeah.
But no. So what I want to say is since sort of first seeing the film, and my response to it remains, my response to the content of the film remains unchanged.
Right.
But my response to what the film is about, right, and what they were trying to achieve, I think I crudely yesterday compared it to like the two types of art, right? Modern art and art that's actually of something. And I think I would go back on that now. I think that's unfair of me to have said that. I think having heard people talk about it, having heard Ballard talk about it, having heard Cronenberg talk about it, having read up on it a little bit, the film is exactly the film they set out to make, right?
Right.
They weren't trying to make They weren't trying to make a film about anything other than what they put on screen, right?
Yeah.
So when I get, upset at films where fuck all happens and then like pretentiously someone comes out afterwards and goes, well, really, it's about the, ennui of existence, or, it's actually it was about the paternity case that I had over a child that I found out that I had or something. And you're like, but nothing in the movie was about that. Three people stared out of a window, someone shot someone, and someone ate haggis or something. And you're like, well, but that's not, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
So I was unfair in that, and I want to say that the Crash isn't that. Like, what? In fact, the more you read about Crash, and the more you listen to people talk about Crash, it's exactly the movie they all set out to make. It's like to the letter the movie they set out to make. Like there was zero compromise on the part of the producers, the director, or the cast. All the cast willingly signed on for the script. The film is very close to the script. And as far as Ballard's concerned, the film pushes the themes of the book beyond the book, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, Ballard even talks about, he's like, my hardest thing in the book was I was constantly having to try and come up for reasons. So all the things I was talking about yesterday about like, I don't understand necessarily their motivations or how these characters found each other or what the through line is and blah, 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 blah. The Ballard actually says, like, I spent time wrestling with that in the book. The best thing about the movie is Cronenberg did away with that. Yeah. Cronenberg's attitude was, well, all these people have the same fetish, away we go kind of thing. Which certainly cuts through, a lot of the convoluted, like, how do you write a scene where it's like, well, sheepishly over a coffee at a cafe, I'm into fucking in car wrecks. Oh, really? I could try that. Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's not, it's not necessarily going to be the scene in the movie that necessarily drives it. I think my criticism of the film's like not having more broad characters, not expanding on Vaughn's thing, etc., etc. I still understand that would be a different movie, right? I'm not trying to say that is the movie that Cronenberg set out to make. I think the movie and the reasons why they set out to make this movie what it is are fine, and I think that the end result speaks exactly to that. I think what I will modify my review to is that it as interesting as the subject matter is, and the subject matter is interesting. I don't just mean like sex for the sake of sex. I mean all the places you can take that. Machinery, cars, body modification versus car modification, how we treat, Cronenberg mentioned something in the Cannes press conference about like film and cinema, cars and cinema kind of starting at the same time and being the same age, and sort of how cinema liberates and how cars liberate, and sort of some comparisons there, which are a bit like on the nose pretentious, but there's something there, right? Yeah. There's something in the scenes with Vaughn being fascinated over the big metal contraption that Spader is using to hold his leg together in the hospital, and the kind of fascination that Spader has the twisted metal of the cars and the junkyards and things like that. So there's some really interesting things there. I just don't think it necessarily makes for a compelling film that you'd want to rewatch. But I think that, like I said yesterday, the discussion around it is far more fascinating than maybe the film itself. But that means the film is successful because the film does exactly what it set out to do, right? And what I like about being able to talk about it on a podcast like this versus, some Tonight Show or whatever, or some official film review program, is you can't talk candidly about it on those shows.
Right.
I think that's the problem that Spader has, and even Cronenberg has when being interviewed about the thing, is they can't really say, everything that they would like to in the same way that we can. There was something interesting that came up in the Cannes press conference as well that was about sort of, I think one of the critics said something about like the detachment of the characters, and I think Cronenberg was talking about that as well. And Cronenberg mentions, he's like, it would be a different film if we made it now, because, a few months later, because sort of the advent of the internet and so on and so forth. He said, I also think, he said kind of what I said yesterday, which is he talks about human sexuality post, in vitro fertilization and being able to essentially produce a child with neither partner having ever met, right? And certainly never having had sex. He's like, sex started off as we were animals to have babies, right? Once we could do that without having to have sex, which we can do now, sex became a human construct, right? Which is kind of what I was saying yesterday about sexuality kind of being on the spectrum. And he said, I think it gives way to far more experimentation and open-mindedness and danger and other stuff, all this sort of part of sexuality, which is sort of, again, what I was kind of alluding to yesterday. And I think that when you talk about that and then you look at like the advent of the internet and then you put it together with the comment about like the characters being detached, in a weird way, Crash could be looked at as... I know we've made this joke before on Mo's old show, but about like subreddits, right? About various kinks on subreddits. But I mean, any internet forum, right? The internet, I forget what they call the rule, but there is a rule that if you can think about it, there's porn on the internet about it, right? So, if your thing is like, I don't know, dressing a woman up as a gibbon in a big flowery hat and, having her milk a ostrich or something, you could probably find that on the internet, right? And there would be a subreddit, dedicated to that. And in a weird way, Crash examines the humans that would, and probably do on a daily basis, participate in a Pornhub forum or or an adults only chat room or whatever on the internet, or even in the comments underneath porn on Pornhub or one of these sites, and looking at that detachment, because there's this detachment, right? There's this, there's an old song. And I'm going to forget what it's called, but there's an old song by Billy Joel that's essentially about phone sex. It's about like calling someone up in the middle of the night, and I can't remember what it's called now. But it's on one of the players there. But he's talking about phone sex. He's talking about calling someone up in the middle of the night and wanting something long distance, even though you can't possibly be there, and it's not necessarily the same as it is in person. And these are like basically the lyrics of the song, right? But it's like I need satisfaction right now or whatever, right? And he's basically, it's funny because it's sort of a very open song. If you listen to the lyrics, I'm sure most people haven't. It's a very open song about like, I'm going to call someone up in the middle of the night and jerk it while they, whatever, right?
Right.
Which is totally fine. But I'm saying, you put that together with Crash and then with the idea of like internet forums where people can discuss or participate in these very intimate sexual activities without ever meeting, without ever touching, without whatever. That and add AI and VR and all the rest of it to it now. Like I'm talking internet technology from 20 years ago. Now you've got even more possibilities, I'm sure. When you look at that and then you sort of put Crash into the mix, you kind of go, well, that's what the movie is. Yes, the movie, like I described the movie before as porn, and what's interesting about that is so is Ballard and so is Cronenberg. So right. I'm not alone in that now that I've done my research. But it could also be looked at as that, those sort of like-minded people, sexuality being a construct or whatever we choose to make it, and then us having the technology. Back then it was obviously car accidents, car wrecks, and whatever in the film. In reality, it was late night dating chat lines, right? Hotlines or chat lines, right? On the telephone. And I'm sure there were, clubs and bars where there were message, group signs up on a pinboard somewhere that sort of said, interested in this, meet, behind the dumpsters at 8 o'clock or whatever. I'm sure this has been going on since the days of the carrier pigeon. But, the fact that Crash kind of looks at something way before it was, everyday or commonplace or whatever. And the fact that Cronenberg talked about the fact that human sexuality would only grow and change and evolve, and they were trying back then to think of the most extreme version of that, right? So rather than just, furries or whatever, or, I get turned on by dressing up as an animal, that's relatively tame compared to car accidents or whatever, but it comes from the same kind of place. And the fact that they kind of put that together and heralded sort of the dawn of human sexuality or the remaking of human sexuality, the movie does do that. Like, the movie does do that. That is in the film if you want to see it. So not that I've done a 180 on the film, because I still wouldn't put it in tomorrow and go, oh, what a marvelous movie. But there's stuff in there. Do you know what I mean? There's like a lot in there if you choose to. And it's not pretentious, strokey beard, oh, I'm hypothesizing. It's in there, and it was intentionally in there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's almost like the film itself is almost like a twisted 100-minute version of an everything you wanted to know about sex but were afraid to ask vignette, right? And instead of it, like, and right, you could see like Gene Wilder. That's a great way to put it, yeah. Right. And so, instead of it being Gene Wilder in a goofy role, we've got Sleazy, we've got Spader doing it in this kind of more serious version, but still like the same idea. And the other thing too, I think, is that, with like you talk about with human sexuality, it's funny, in my novel Chad in Accounting, the main character, Chad, meets this woman who might not be the brightest bulb, and she makes a comment about dolphins, because she has the dolphin tramp stamp in her lower back, and he brings up a thing about, oh, you got a dolphin. She's like, yeah, did you know they're the only animals who have sex for pleasure? And he thinks it's like a come on. Right. And he's like, oh, well, yes, between them and us, of course, right? And she goes, no, humans aren't animals, which that was a conversation that actually happened to me in real life. But beyond that, right, beyond the fact that, yes, dolphins have sex for pleasure as well, but humans are the only ones that can, like, kind of have these kinds of kinks, right? Like, I mean, I guess, yeah, your dog or your cat can just hump some random piece of furniture or something, right? But for the most part, humans have these kinks. And the car is the most fascinating one, right? Because it's, I heard Keith Olbermann say, when they were talking about driving cars, when he used to have his old show Countdown, he was talking to somebody about, self-driving cars, and he said, he was saying to the person, is the bug in the system the fact that cars were invented before computers, right? And the fact that, like, right, if we'd invented computers first, then we'd have our self-driving cars and nobody would get into these car accidents. But it's just like humans to invent this thing that's like, that takes over our entire world, right? I mean, cars are everywhere. I mean, obviously, yes, I don't drive, but it's like I still interact with cars on a daily basis when I go out and, cars are driving around. That it would be like just like humans to invent this thing that's very deadly. It's this big, massive machine. It has all kinds of technology and stuff inside of it. So many people are tied to it. I mean, my wife and I watch Mad Men on Freevee. We get commercials. I would say probably 50 to 75% of the commercials are car related in some way, whether it's the actual car.
Every
car
holiday
insurance.
Is an excuse for another car sale.
Right, exactly.
Memorial Day car events, President's Day car events, July 4th car events. Yeah.
Right. Everything has to do with cars. And of course, it doesn't apply to us, but it's such a major piece of one's life. And
Well, America couldn't exist
Right.
in the way that it does without cars.
Right.
I mean, America is the country, built on the back of cars to some extent. Like once Ford invented the motor car or whatever, like all bets were off for the rest of the world in terms of, and that doesn't mean obviously like, there's Japanese cars and Chinese cars and even European cars or whatever that people like and purchase and are shipped around the world now and whatever. But in general, the invention of the motor car made this vast landmass a lot more traversable. Unlike other countries, like Japan, for example, America has never moved on the idea of super fast trains or other environmentally friendlier forms of travel. Planes and cars remain, the big gas guzzling thing remains the way to traverse America. And, there's some interesting things there. Like, for example, the self-driving car. As someone who recently learned to drive, this is interesting, right? So I didn't drive for years and years and years, right? I was always the passenger or public transportation. And since moving out to Connecticut, I've learned to drive. And the thing is, I absolutely adore driving, like absolutely love driving. And the idea of a self-driving car is, to me, the complete antithesis of why a car exists. The whole point of a car to exist is to be behind the wheel. That's the whole point. And it is intrinsically linked to the danger involved. Not that I purposely drive dangerously. I'm not saying that. Like, I consider myself to be a safe and controlled driver. But even a safe, controlled driver faces danger every time they go out on the road, whether it's I'm in the countryside, right? A deer or a turkey or any number of animals could leap out in front of me and have done, thankfully not causing any accidents, but could leap out in front of me at any time. I live on a long, windy road that's 40 miles an hour that most people drive 60 miles an hour because there's nowhere for cops to park, so people drive it at higher speeds or whatever. There's always danger, right, when you go out into the car. But that's the point, right? There's an argument to say that life is danger, that living is danger, right? And, there are people who take it to extreme and throw themselves out of planes and bungee jump and, cross incredibly treacherous ravines on like rickety bridges for fun or whatever, right? Harnessed in, but still they do it. And there's any number of videos online or TikTok or whatever showing people up the Khalifa Tower or whatever it is in Dubai, like doing the Tom Cruise thing and leaping around on the top of the tall buildings or parkour, jumping from building to building, whatever it is, right? Life is danger, right? Yeah. That's like to live is to experience some level of danger. Yeah. And so to remove that, to say we've made a completely safe car that essentially has like a techno bubble around it, meaning nothing can come within a foot without kind of the car either stopping or retracting or whatever it does, right? These sensors, this kind of bubbly sensor around it, right? That drives itself and all you have to do is sit in it. I'd be like, but that to me is the death of life. That is the complete antithesis of the whole point. Like most people who drive, who love driving, who love cars, they don't, even the new cars, they don't want. They want some old beater because the more like beat up and old and cool and rusty and whatever, the better, like the more fun it is to drive because the more danger there is. Like any minute now the wheel could roll off and away we go. You know what I mean? Like there's intrinsically part of that in the process of driving. So and it's the same with even with art, if you want to make this link. Like part of making a movie like Crash, right, is, there's the psychological and the philosophical and the meditative and all that kind of stuff. There's all the cerebral, right, the brain aspect of it, right? I want to say this, I want to explore that, I want to do that, right? But there's also the schoolboy danger of, I want to make a movie with a bunch of pubic hair in it and see if I can get it out into the public sphere, right? Because there's a little bit of fun in that. And you're not going to tell me that David Cronenberg, who we know notoriously has like a sense of humor and a weird look at life, or certainly not a weird look at life, a decent look at life, but a weird way to portray that, that he's not a little bit when he's writing this be like, oh, wait till they see this. You know what I mean? Like this is, and there's danger in that, right? There's danger in words. There's danger in video and in performance, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be drawn to it, right? We wouldn't be, and the more bland films become, the less they satisfy, right? The less they engage, the less we come out of the cinema feeling that the world has been changed. So art even speaks to that danger or frisson or whatever of life, right?
Right. Well, no, I think, getting back to sort of that idea of the car and violence, right? Or the car and danger and the car and sex, right? The car and sexual.
Right.
It's funny. I remember when I was in graduate school, I read this novel, or we had to read this book called Armies of the Night that Norman Mailer wrote. I think he won the Pulitzer Prize for it. Essentially, the book was he goes to a Vietnam War protest and he says, he goes there. Essentially, he's going there symbolically to get arrested, so it can be on the news that Norman Mailer was arrested protesting the war. And what ends up happening is he ends up going to like this like holding cell thing that they had in Northern Virginia, where they were stuffing everybody. Like he met like Noam Chomsky and stuff there. He ended up having to cancel his plans for the weekend because he was held over for the weekend, which he wasn't expecting. But anyway, one of the things he mentions in that novel, because he's talking about the kids that are there, and these kids would have been about David Cronenberg's age. But he talks about the fact that when he was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, that nobody had cars. And so to have sex with a girl, it was really difficult because you had to find a place where the two of you could go that you wouldn't get caught, right? And of course, him being born in the 20s, growing up in the 30s, it would have been a big deal, right? If you'd been caught having sex when you were a teenager. But that this next generation that were born in the 40s, mid 40s, like Cronenberg born in 43, and I don't know how affluent Cronenberg would have been, but he probably would have been affluent enough based on his father being a newspaperman and all of that he would have had a car. He would have had his own car, or he would have had a car, that he was using for his dad's or whatever that he could take a date on. And he could just park that car wherever and have sex with a woman there. And there was no fear of getting caught, right? Because you wouldn't have to try to find some place that you could get away with having sex. You could just park wherever you wanted to and have sex. And it was like, in a way, it took the danger out of it. And in his mind, it kind of made it too easy, right? That these kids had it too easy, that even with sex, they were just having sex all over the place. But I think for someone like a Cronenberg, for people growing up in that age, it intermingled sex and cars and automobiles in a way that I think Cronenberg kind of takes it to this other level with with Crash, where it's like, people having sex in cars, right? I mean, we see we see Holly Hunter and Spader, have sex in the parking lot there in the airport, kind of a common thing, right? Sex in cars is just a very common thing here in America. And he's like, but what about the car accident itself, right? Like you talk about the danger, right? Normally the danger is just getting caught, right? Having the cop, rattle on the window with his mag light and saying, what are you kids doing here? Get out of here, whatever.
Right.
But no, this is like, what about the people being turned on by the car accidents, having a sexualized feeling that you already associate cars and sex in such a way in America that. Yeah, taking it that next level. But I think you're right too, right? That
everywhere is somewhere to have, the moment we invented a new thing,
right?
it was can we have sex with it or in it or on it?
But the car almost like the car was like almost like. Because you think about, right, like you can't just go stay in a hotel when you're a teenager because one, like now you wouldn't be able to do it anyway because you have to be like in your 21, 25, whatever to rent a hotel room. But then also, right, this idea of like, oh, you've got to be married back then to have a hotel or whatever. Right. But it's like a car is like this like mini hotel that you can take wherever you want, and of course those cars back then, right, they had those big long bench seats and everything where you could stretch out and everything on them.
But to park is literally a thing. Like,
right.
We're going to go somewhere and park. Right. And what was even weirder back then, if movies and books are to be believed, that a bunch of people went and parked all together, in a row, like at Lovers Overlook or something, where they were all parked in a row, all essentially trying to do the same thing. The drive-in, the same thing. People went to the movies at the drive-in because the car was somewhere where you could have sex. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean. Look at like anything, like planes, right? The Mile High Club, right? Look up people having sex in libraries, right?
Right.
People having sex in churches, right?
Yeah.
It's
we create a space, right, that's often for like either a practical thing like travel or a solemn thing like learning or reading or funerals or prayer or whatever. And we'll either find a way to have sex in it or we'll fetishize having sex in it. And, once cinema came along, we'll then film those things, right? So, and what's funny is there are, even outside of a film like Crash, which is specifically about sex, there are, even in things that are meant to just be teen comedies, there are sex scenes in scenarios that would normally only be seen in porn or whatever. I mean, there's a whole thing in Eurotrip where they fuck in the Vatican in a confessional, right? And you're like, well, I mean, if that isn't a pornographic idea, I don't know what it. Like, it's not in there because it's funny. It's in there because it's shocking, because it's titillating, because it's taboo and whatever. And that often is in often comedies, especially teen comedies or teen romps or sex romps or whatever, remove humor for the sake of shock value, right? Yeah. But it's still the same thing, whether it's shocking in a serious way or shocking in a comedic way. Human beings will find a way to fuck on it, in it, with it, around it, whatever. It just, we're monkeys with guns flinging our own poop, right? So it just is what it is.
But the car, what's interesting with the car, though, is the car is more liberating than it is dangerous when it comes to sex, right? Because a lot of the places that you named, they're places you really shouldn't be having sex. Like they're illicit places, the library, all that. But the car created this safe space that actually made it so that sex became, for teenagers at that time, for someone Cronenberg's age, who's in his teens in the late 50s, early 60s,
right.
It suddenly becomes an easier way to have sex. Like there's no sneaking around that's needed. It's just we're going on a date. We need to be back by this time. We're going to park the car over here. Whereas to Mailer's point, all those other places that you mentioned, where the library, trying to find a room in a house, seeing if parents are going to be working all day, things like that. There was that danger of being caught. And it's almost like sex becomes, I don't want to say commonplace, but we get the sexual revolution, right? That kind of comes after this. It's almost like the car fuels the sexual revolution, because it's almost like when you take the danger out of it and people are just having sex, they're almost like, why was this so bad, right? There's nothing bad about this. Right. And what's interesting with Cronenberg is he takes it kind of this next level where it's like, how do you make it bad again? Okay, let's have it be that the car crashes turn people on. And there's that, because the car crashes, right, they don't just affect the people involved. Elias Koteas is creating these 3 and 4 car pileups just to get his rocks off.
Right.
And those are a lot of people. It's, people that are just going about their business, hoping to have a nice day, who suddenly now have to deal with insurance, have to deal with hot medical bills and all this stuff because Elias Koteas was horny.
And it is interesting, actually, that you bring up insurance and medical bills, because the movie doesn't go into the bureaucracy of car crashes.
Right. Yeah, exactly, because that would be sexy.
Right, exactly. If Spader was in the hospital being fondled by Elias Koteas, and then someone came over and went, by the way, Mr. Spader, that'd be $10,000. It's not with a clipboard or something. That wouldn't be sexy, right? Or so and so's insurance company has been chasing me down for weeks. That wouldn't be exciting. There's sort of an art to it as far as Vaughn is concerned. He's actually both excited and disappointed to find out that his stuntman did the Jane Mansfield crash without him.
Exactly, yes, right.
On one hand, he's like, oh, no, you went ahead and did it without me. But on the other hand, he's like, right, but look at the dog and look at the head and look at the, he's excited by it.
Yes.
Which is, fine. But that's sort of trying to pull art into it. If you're just talking about sort of the violence and the sex thing, it's and I can't know exactly where it comes from. I can honestly say I understand it. I'm not someone who watches Crash and goes, well, I don't understand it. None of these people are realistic, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no. I totally understand the idea behind the metaphor of the car accident, or even the reality of the car accidents causing people to get horny. It's as much to do with the taboo nature of it as it is to do with real life. There's a reason why I would never do it, but I understand why someone wants to be choked out while they're having a sexual experience.
Right.
It's not my particular
kink, and I'm not shaming anyone whose it is, but I understand it because it's like, but I also think there's something, and I think this is also represented in the film, I also think there's something slightly sad about it, right? Because and I don't mean that as, that sounds like I'm being negative. Live how you want to live. I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying, on one end of the sexual spectrum, right, you have two people who are married, two people who are very in love on like a big 4-poster bed with billowy sheets and, bluebirds chirping on the windowsill while they have slow but beautiful and sensual missionary position sex, right? And then on the other hand, you have Spader grubbly fucking a leg wound in a junkyard, right? Or whatever it is. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, right? Those are the two things. And like everything with human nature, the truth is that a sort of healthy sexual appetite, a healthy sexual interaction would be somewhere in the middle, right? It would have a little excitement, a little danger, a little frizz-on, little experimentation, but it would also have all the love, connection, sentimentality, romance, of the other end of the spectrum, right? It would have the safety of, I love you, I'm not going to hurt you, this is us in unison, exploring ourselves or whatever, but it would also have like some danger or some excitement or something that was a bit taboo about it or whatever. So the truth always lies somewhere in the middle, but we tend to make art or conversation about the extremes, right?
Yeah, and I think one thing that's interesting, because, you think of like the success of like the whole, whatever, 50 Shades of Grey, 40 Shades, I don't remember what number.
50 Shades
of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey. Okay, I did have that right. I was thinking the wrong one. But, that kind of like...
By the way, I've never read the book or seen the movies. I just know that it's 50. That's just,
right. Yeah. I haven't either. I've never done either. And but it's funny because my kind of the recent novel I've had...
because I don't like corporate approved sexual activity. Like because like at least when Verhoeven made Basic Instinct, there was still a little danger to that, right? It wasn't the norm. The thing I've never understood about the Twilight's 50 Shades of Grey, there was a movie on Netflix that went viral because it had sex scenes in it. That everyone was watching, that was like a terrible movie, but it shot up the charts on Netflix because everyone was watching it. The stuff I don't understand about that is, and their so-called like Hollywood sanctioned sex scenes, is you could go onto the internet and type, man fucking a horse while woman, paints a picture of Bob Ross or something, and you can find it, right? It'll show up. So I don't understand in a world where, sex, any type of sex, whether it's, softcore and romantic right through to the most extreme hardcore, I don't understand why a movie that is pure, shiny Hollywood corporate titillation with no true understanding of S&M. I don't believe that anyone involved in 50 Shades of Grey has any broad understanding of BDSM at all as an actual fetish or kink. I think they just do it based on like power structure and whatever. And I think it's probably incredibly infantile and probably even borderline misogynistic, although I'm making a judgment against it having not seen it. But the thing I don't understand is the popularity of those things, because to my way of thinking is, well, if you're genuinely interested in BDSM or you think it turns you on or whatever, and maybe you've experimented a little with it in your own life, there are plenty of places you can go completely safely, both in public clubs and groups and other things, or on the internet if you want to remain anonymous, where you can experience what it actually is, rather than watching 50 Shades of Grey and having a couple of actors who, by their own admission, were not that into it, performing it for you. I just don't. That to me baffles me, but that's because I don't necessarily subscribe to the world that everyone else is living in. But anyway, sorry, you were in the middle of saying something.
Well, no, because I think that's like safe, dangerous sexuality, right? I mean, you think about the 90s, it was just filled with these erotic thrillers that had like this sort of, again, this kind of safe but dangerous S&M kind of thing. And I mean, S&M, that kind of thing was, obviously, Marquis de Sade, but I think of like the Aldous Huxley novel, After Many a Summer. Here in the States, it's After Many a Summer Dies the Swan. But there's this guy who's this archivist, from England, who's like in California, who's like looking at these old books. And of course, he's like drawn to the ones that have S&M in them. And he's even talking about how like art back then and like sculptures of there's always women in chains and stuff like that. So it's sort of like this thing that's been around for a while, and we've all had a long time to sort of get comfortable enough with it that we feel like we're like, I think the mainstream can feel like they're kinky if they watch a 50 Shades of Grey when they're really not. And Cronenberg, it's like, I think an S&M thing would be too safe for him, right? It's like, but also too, it doesn't have that technology or that modern machine element that he really needs, you know, sort of like this like twisted metal commingled with the sexual part of it. And it's like, yeah, it's like this is when, you know, this is the thing that kind of makes the people who like 50 Shades of Grey blush and just get disgusted and be like, I don't want anything to do with it. But it is kind of fascinating how like it's almost like, right, like you were talking about earlier that like as humans, right, humans sexualize everything. There's a fetish for everything, right, kind of thing. And this is the one that's probably that would be the scariest for people. And then like Cronenberg, like he kind of take, you know, with the cast and crew and everybody involved, they take it up a level by the fact that they're just getting into car accidents and having sex all the time,
right.
Which again, that's not what happens. I don't know 50 Shades of Grey either, so I shouldn't really comment too much. Right. But it is an interesting thing where it's like, I mean, like the novel I just came out with most recently, the main character was writing romance novels under a pen name around the time that 50 Shades is big, and his publisher is pushing him to do 50 Shades kind of like stuff in his books, and so he's kind of just like coming up with things, just kind of, you know, slapping it together kind of deal, but. It's the kind of thing that you could just slap together. Like, I don't think you can slap together Crash. Like, I don't think you could, like, you couldn't just go into, you couldn't go into a publishing house and say, all right, romance novelist, I need more Crash, right? Like, you couldn't just.
And if Crash succeeds at all, it's an interesting point. If Crash succeeds at all, right, is that when you watch it or when you engage with it, or when you read it or when you listen to Ballard or Cronenberg talk about it, it's not that someone sat down and went, I know, sex with a leg wound, right, all right, yeah. You know, whatever it is, right, or sex in a busy airport parking lot or whatever, right, you know, or whatever. I mean, all the scenes in the movie, like having sex with your camera operator or whatever. Like, it's not that someone just sat down and was like, oh, I'm going to put together a bunch of sex scenes. Yeah. There is a definite purpose behind all of it. And there's a definite exploration that's happening throughout it. You know, that's what makes it, you know, interesting beyond the, you know, but beyond just the nudity or whatever, beyond just the sexual activity in the film. So that's definitely a line to walk that, like you say, you couldn't just knock one of these off in a weekend and go, well, I've thought of 10 more outrageous sex scenes. Right. You know, let's just string those together and voila, there's another movie, right?
Ryan Gosling, when he did Blue Valentine, you know, that movie, they had a lot of trouble getting that movie released because of the amount of sex scenes, you know, in that film. And he's like, but there's no violence in this movie really at all. You know, I mean, there's some arguments that they have, but it's really just about two people that are in love having sex and having sex scenes. And then like their marriage is falling apart and it maybe shouldn't have even been together to be, you know, to begin with and all these things. And he's like, sex is just a part of a marriage that's important to have. And he's like, why is this movie getting, you know, getting killed? Like, I mean, I think they wanted to make that one NC-17. I can't remember if they had to edit it to get it to R or something, but it's just sex. And I think it's like one of those things where you had an actor and an actress who were perfectly fine in wanting to do the scenes that they were doing, right? Because Michelle Williams is the co-star in that one,
right?
And they were perfectly fine doing the scenes that they were doing. They wanted to do it, and he's like, and I think it's where the whole like Ryan Gosling feminist ally meme started was kind of the way he was talking about this movie. But I think it's to that point that it's like with so many bad, you know, problem, and not even just problematic, but downright like abusive and you know, just horrible things that were happening. When you have these sort of more positive elements that, but because the movie itself is too, and it's just one of those things. I guess it's just, you know, one of those things too, where you know, people getting shot is better than sex. But I think
it comes from repression. I mean, what we're talking about with all this stuff and people's reaction to things and why it makes no sense, and even the 50 Shades of Grey conversation,
right?
It comes down to repression, and there's nothing more dangerous than repression. But most people are not, you know, most people are not out, right? So
And what I mean by that is, yes, I know out is reserved predominantly for people kind of coming out to do with their sexuality or the LGBTQ community, but actually it's about being comfortable in your own skin. It's about being open with, and it's about going through life being open with who you are and what you want out of life, right? And most people don't at all in any way, right? Yeah. Most people do not want to, they either don't want to rock the boat, or they don't want to be judged, or they don't want someone calling them a pervert, or whatever it is, right? So a lot of this stuff either builds up, right? And comes out as violence, predatory behavior, rape, whatever it is, right? Or it goes on, but it goes on like behind closed doors and is sort of made sinister or fetishized or hidden away or whatever. And whenever being confronted with people who are just comfortable, either talking about this stuff, acting this stuff out, or watching this stuff, that's often seen as this threat. It's often seen as this abandonment of some kind of like social morality. Because I think there is this weird thing that if someone went, well, by the way, I like being tied up, right? I like being dominated a little. Like if people lived that way, that suddenly everyone would be fucking in the streets, right? Right. That somehow human nature is not able to live in a world where both things are true, where you can be openly BDSM, but you can still have a 9 to 5, go for dinner with the in-laws and not be constantly talking about it. I think people think that if you want to be a furry or into BDSM or into frotting or whatever it is, a purveyor of frottage, that suddenly that would open the floodgates and everything would be Sodom and Gomorrah. And listen, they might not be wrong. Human beings are not good at walking that middle line at all. In fact, human nature finds it very difficult. I think if we could walk that middle line, everyone would be very happy and everyone would be having like good nuanced existences where you didn't have to be liberal or didn't have to be Republican. You could have a nice middle ground. You wouldn't have to be an atheist or be a religious fundamentalist. You could walk like a nice middle ground. You wouldn't have to be beating people into submission and assaulting them sexually, or you wouldn't have to be like an angel that never does anything other than it's behind closed doors with billowy curtains. You could walk a nice fine line between those two things. But human beings don't like to live in that, and so that's where all this behavior comes from is this deep rooted repression that people like to blame the Puritans for, and they like to blame the British for, and like that. But repression exists everywhere, even in the most so-called open and exposed societies. There's repressions of other, like you find very sexually open societies can often be very repressed about violence or whatever, and countries like America, which are very open about violence, are very repressed sexually, and that's just a very obvious example, but there are others out there.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point because there is and now the term, of course, everything has a term nowadays, which I guess that's always been the case, because I always remember Boy George being interviewed about androgyny, and he's like, androgynous is a trendy word and I hate it, and I always remember that line. And so
that's a great Boy George impression, and if he was still around as prevalently as he was in the 80s, you would have a job there being able to imitate him on TV, America's Got Talent or something. But sorry, carry on. I do a Boy George impression. Sorry.
Here we go. Androgyny is a trendy word, and I hate it.
I hate it.
I can't think of anything else that I could say in that voice. But there's that trendy term of kink shaming, right? This whole thing, and it's interesting because in Chad and Accounting, the main character Chad has a date with a woman that it starts to turn amorous, and the next thing she wants him to put on a bear costume, and she has a thing for guys for bears, and she wants him to wear this bear costume, and it gets to be too much for him, and he takes it off, and he's like all massive sweat and everything like that. And I realized that I had kind of set the scene up where it was like poor Chad going out with this crazy woman who likes to sleep with guys dressed in bear costumes, right? And I had to fully flesh out the scene to give her more depth, to be like, no, there's reasons for what, she has this fetish, this whole thing about her being married, dating a guy who's a furry who like went so big into furries where he moves out to a commune in Arizona where everybody's dressed as furries all day long, and she couldn't bear to be with it, but whatever. But it was like that thing where I think for so long, right, it's always been when these kinds of things are depicted in mainstream media, it is in a way that's like a depravity. I mean, I didn't know what a ball gag was until I saw Pulp Fiction, right? And then suddenly, like, everything had them after that, because Pulp Fiction was so big, and it was like everything was in Pulp Fiction was everywhere after that. But that, it's not seen in any kind of way that's like right, like it's seen in a way that's crazy, right? I mean, these guys that have captured Ving Rhames and Bruce Willis are not good people, right? They're psychos that are, they've been doing whatever this thing is that they've been doing for years, and fortunately, our heroes escape, right? But it's not depicted in a way that's like, oh yeah, like these things, like you said, like there are people that can just do these things, that there can be a relationship between a man and a woman, that there isn't, one of them's into this, one of them's also into it from a different stand, like that kind, like it's never really depicted in that way. I mean, I guess HBO started to do a good job of it in the 90s with their shows about that kind of thing, but even then it's still seen as like this edge culture kind of thing.
No, I mean, I think that's a good point. It's that, and I can think of other examples. There's a movie called Personal Services about a madam in the UK who used to service a lot of sort of politicians and wealthy, powerful people who liked to be infantilized, right? And dressed up as babies or whatever. And there's documentaries about sort of that infantilism kink as well, and stuff like that. And, prostitutes who, can lactate and are used as mother substitutes or whatever. There's all sorts of that kind of thing. And what's, like anything, right? Like most of our representation of these things in popular culture, right? Even if it's, the real sex documentaries, or it's, an expose on something, or it's an internet thing, or even if it's porn, or even if it's Crash or whatever, it's always represented as these people aren't you, right? Right. And actually, if anything that Crash possibly does wrong is that none of these characters are everyday people.
Right.
They don't even behave, talk, act, whatever, like everyday people. Right. And that's possibly to its detriment, because I've never subscribed to the idea of the other. Right. Or even, and I understand, when you get to math, right? That certain groups are a minority over other groups, right? I understand that just in terms of sheer numbers, right? You can say this type of person, gay people or whatever, 12, 10%, whatever of the population or whatever it is, right? But if you start to divide up the population by everything that a person can be, right, you'll start to realize that everyone is part of a 10% of something, right? If you're going to start compartmentalizing human beings down into percentages of groups so that they can be, I don't know, organized, dealt with, legalized, whatever. I don't know, all the reasons for doing it. Or they can just be seen, right? A lot of it, it's just, I just want to be seen, right? I just want to be part of a society. But the flip happens, right? The more you try and push something into society, the more people see it as an external force trying to get in, when it's not. It's all part of humanity, all of it, everything on the spectrum, from the most hard right-leaning, I'm straight, I'm white, leave me the fuck alone, fucking gun-toting, truck driver, whatever, right? Who, by the way, has so many insecurities and so many sexual repressions, I don't even know where to begin. Right?
Who knows what he's looking at on the internet?
Of course, right? Of course, right? Yeah. Right through to the most, like, I identify as a wisp of air, right? And I don't have any, all the way through to the other end where I identify as a cotton bud or something, right? Right. And everything in between. It's, at the end of the day, the one thing we have to wrestle with is it's all part of the human animal, all of it, every single bit of it. And some of us have more of it than others, right? Yeah. But to define us by one or two things, but to define us by who we love, to define us by the color of our skin, to define us by the length of our hair, to define us by having boobs or not, whatever. It's all irrelevant. If it's relevant to you as an individual, and a society should be built up where you as an individual can do whatever you want with your body in whatever space, as long as you're not hurting another human being without their consent first, right?
Right. Yeah.
Society should exist in that way. And that's where we're trying to get to, right? And evolution is always a bumpy road with push, pull, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, all the rest of it. But, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or however you want to say it. But at the end of the day, the presenting Crash in the way where you're just like, well, that's those people.
Right.
Those people feel that way about sex, or those people feel that way about cars. And I'm like, right, but those people are probably relatives of yours, right? I wanted to bring it back to Crash quickly just before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
But there's a great bit in the trivia that was like, apparently there was much discussion, right, about what Deborah Unger would be holding on to in the scene where in the hospital bed, she's meant to be masturbating James Spader under the blanket, right?
Yes, yeah.
Which is hilarious to me because I'm just like, mime it. Like, put your hand under the blanket and move it up and down. Like, why do you have to be holding onto anything?
Yeah.
But apparently there was much discussion about this, right? And this is what I love. Like, I almost would love more to have like a very... Like, why doesn't Crash have this very in-depth fly-on-the-wall documentary about the making of it? Because I think that that's far more fascinating than what ended up coming out. Because I want to see a long discussion between Deborah Unger, James Spader, and Cronenberg, talking about, like, well, what could she possibly be rubbing underneath the blanket, right? Where know Spader's thinking, well, don't worry, I'll just get hard. Like, just rub me. You know what I mean? Like Spader, and not in a predatory way, in a method acting way. Anyway, I'm not. Listen, Spader is like, I don't mean to put that onto Spader. I just mean to make a joke. Anyway,
I wonder because there's a Criterion version of Crash out there. I wonder if
there's a documentary. But he says apparently they ended up with a very lifelike dildo that James Spader wanted to wear, which he did. So I love the idea of Spader going, oh, look, I found this I happen to have this incredibly lifelike dildo just hanging around. And not only that, but he really wanted to wear it. Like, it could have been on a cardboard box and she could have faked it. Because, like, apart from the one wide shot where all you see is her hand under the blanket after James finishes, the close-up is literally just a blanket going up and down. Like anything could have been under the bed. But the fact that Spader was like, not only do I have a lifelike dildo, but I'm really excited about wearing it. I just think that's fantastic.
Apologies. We sadly have to pause for some ads. Maybe if more of you supported us on Patreon. But there it is.
So
now, interesting. One last interesting piece that I had, kind of along that line, again within the trivia. Remember, I mentioned this was number 9 in my top 10 films of the 90s. According to the IMDb trivia, and I think I remember reading this actually, that this is number 8 on Scorsese's list, which actually makes sense if you think about the fact that number 2 on my list was Goodfellas, and I don't think Scorsese had any of his own movies on the list, so that would actually mean that Crash would go up the list, perhaps. But so he actually had it even higher than me on his top 10 of the 90s. So I don't know if that's a surprise or if that makes sense with Scorsese.
I feel like Scorsese probably watched this as the artistic human exploration it was intended. I feel like he's pretty well versed in cinematic language and has consumed. I mean, he's consumed, as far as I'm aware, he's consumed more movies than practically anyone else on the planet because he watches, world cinema as much as he watches American cinema. And so I think he probably. Like knew what the film was going for from the beginning. I believe. I can't imagine. I mean, I know nothing about Scorsese really outside of the fact that he was a huge coke fiend at one point. I don't know anything about him. So, he might have said it was one of the best movies of the 90s because he loves watching it every night and jerking off to it. I have no idea. And
actually, I'd forgotten. I'd read because Roger Ebert had his list of his top 10 movies of the 90s, and he did the list with Scorsese, and I'd forgotten about that they did the list together, and I think Crash was on there. Another movie called The Painted Horse, which I hadn't seen. I've seen sent a Chinese film. I think that's what it was, but I'd forgotten about that they did the list together. But I can't remember what he said about Crash, but I kind of remember it being on the list there. And I was kind of shocked because in a way it almost made me feel good about having it on my list. I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, no, I mean, it certainly, I don't know that it's certainly not on my best of the 90s list or whatever, but it's certainly like a quintessential movie of the 90s. If people want to rediscover Crash, as much as I don't necessarily want to go back and watch it again, just because I found it a bit boring. It's generated great discussion, and I think it's a film that people should see and confront and figure out how they feel about it, and so on. So if we can shine a light on it, so much the better. So as we wrap this episode, the last thing that we need to do, as we do at the end of every Sleazy Spader Springtime, is he puts something into the Sleazatorium, right? So in his basement, James Spader has a Sleazatorium that has artifacts from all the films that he was in, and it's never normally the obvious thing, right? It's It's never, it's never the most sexual thing that happens in one of his films. It's like a little weird thing. It's a towel, or it's a hat, or it's a whatever. And the Sleazatorium has all sorts of things in it. Considering Crash is such just a rampantly sexual film, it's going to be difficult. But what do you think that he took from the set of Crash, that every time he looks at it, he just gets a flutter in his groin because it means something very specifically sleazy to him?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, would it have been the fake dog that was found at the scene of the accident?
That is a gloriously dark choice. I absolutely applaud that. I wasn't even thinking that. That is you've won that round, sir. Yes, it's the stuffed mangled dog with flecks of blood on it. I was going to say it was the seat cover that Deborah Kara Unger grabs with I don't know whose hand it is actually, but there's a hand that's covered in seminal fluid or spermatozoa or cum, to use the parlance of our times, that grabs a seat cover in the sequence in the car wash when Elias is roughly having sex with Deborah Kara Unger in the back seat. And I was thinking that maybe Spader would either have taken the seat cover, or even weirder, would have taken the rear view mirror from that car and have that in the Sleazatorium. But I'm sorry, you win with the dead dog. That's phenomenally dark, and I think absolutely wonderful. He took the dead dog and the bra that the dead stuntman was wearing when he did the accident. That's what he took. That's definitely what's in the Sleazatorium. Oh my God, that's phenomenal. That's the darkest answer yet, I think. But it's
well, because the one thing that they're very ambiguous about in the movie is whether or not, like, the characters, like like obviously the film did not kill a real dog, but like whether they, whether that was actually a stuffed dog, or like in the movie that was supposed to be a dog that was
a
like
real dog, right,
that died in the accident. Like it's. It's kind of there, and I guess from the, because I was trying to think if there was something in the car when he goes back to his car and he finds like his porn collection and naked Polaroid.
Oh my God, I wanted to. Yes, what was it? A fistful of beauty. What was it? What was it? A fistful of. It wasn't beauties. No, I've got to find it, because it was, when I saw it, I'm like, that is hilarious. Yeah, that was the porn magazine that they went with, because I'm like, I get you have to make up a porn mag because you don't want to pay for Hustler or Playboy or whatever, but the fact that it was such a ridiculously like bad 70s porn mag, it was near the end, right?
No, it's kind of near the beginning, because his car is crap. He goes to the impound lot to pick up his car, and that's where he meets Holly Hunter, and they go back and have sex, and he's going through the wreckage of his car.
I just want to. That's it.
The name of the magazine is A Fistful of Bimbos.
Right.
That is absolutely splendid. That's what they came up with. That the magazine that James Spader would be reading would be A Fistful of Bimbos. Yeah. That is absolutely phenomenal. Right. When I saw that, I was like, what are you talking? It's actually it's a novel. It's not even a magazine. It's a novel. It says an original novel, A Fistful of Bimbos. Oh my God, that is sheer joy. I got to take a screenshot of that. That's going to be the episode image for this episode. I'm gonna just take a screenshot.
That's the perfect screen. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. Yeah. Oh, A
Fistful of Bimbos. That is incredible. That is, and on that bombshell, we'll end this episode.
All right. That's great.
I wonder if it's a real novel. This is the next thing. Is like, did Cronenberg come up with that, or
right?
I'm now looking it up. It's the internet. You can do that.
Yeah, it's all there for us now. Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is there's a 1988 video directed by John T. Bone called A Fistful of Bimbos, which is a porn film. It has like famous porn actors in it, Randy West and Peter North.
Yeah.
But is it a book? I'm gonna put novel next to it. Let's have a look. It is. It's a real. A Fistful of Bimbos. It's on Biblio, which is a kind of like the IMDb for books.
Right.
It was by an author called Ruby Rhapsody. It's from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Interlude Press, 1989, softcover. It's available. It's in very good condition. It has the usual signs of wear that one would expect to see in any paperback book that has been read. Sure it does. Yeah. Its keywords are explicit erotic fiction, sleaze, erotica, heterosexual erotica. But Fistful of Bimbo, actually this particular copy is no longer available. Other books by Ruby Rhapsody, who wrote that book, includes After Hours Cheat, and Cheating Horny Housewife. But I like the idea that A Fistful of Bimbos, and by the way, Cheating Horny Housewife can fetch up to $100 on the rare book scene. There's currently a copy in Gloucester City in New Jersey. So
that's kind of near me here.
If you want to get to Gloucester City in New Jersey, then go right ahead. It's Between the Covers, Rare Books Inc., and they're selling it for $100. So
of course, $100. But I mean, I just love the idea of Spader either A, being in traffic, right, and he's just like while the car is stopped. I don't know what Toronto's traffic is like, but he's in traffic, or just the idea of him being on the subway in Toronto, just sort of like riding around reading that, but gotta go, I mean, everybody reads a book, right, when they're on the subway. I mean, I guess not anymore. Now I know I'm like one of the rare ones that reads a book on the subway, but I mean, me reading that book, I guess if it's $100, I couldn't, because it's like my backpack, rucksack,
But you know that they went to a sex shop in Toronto.
Yeah, picked that up.
And were looking around, and they saw something called A Fistful of Bimbos, and they were like, that's the book.
Can you imagine going to a sex shop with Spader? Like, that's just in the 90s. Like now I don't know how much it would be fun, but in the 90s, like walking in with him, with his sunglasses on,
I mean, it would be it would just be a bacchanalian orgy by the time you got to the register. It would be an unfettered orgy of filthy novellas and I think the only thing, although Fistful of Bimbos is hilarious, it's a little on the nose. I think Spader would probably prefer something like The Priest and His Mistress or something. What I mean? Something that's everyone knows what it is that you're getting into, but it's not
a fistful of bimbos. It's
Right.
It's tales of debauchery behind the cloistered walls of the monastery, that kind of thing. Probably the zoo workers who like to do it in front of rutting gibbons or something.
Right.
As soon as it's mating time at the zoo, they decide to follow suit and take their lust to filthy animal heights in front of elephants that are being masturbated for artificial insemination, that kind of thing. That would be Spader's jam.
I could almost see Spader too, like finding like the porn version of like Pretty in Pink and being angry that he wasn't cast as himself in it.
I think someone missed a trick when he was at his height, that they didn't cast him in the erotic reimagining of one of his, like the porn version of Mannequin. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Where he gets to reprise the sleazy boss role with his slicked over hair. Only this time the mannequin, blows him or something. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I feel like he would have been into it. I feel like whatever,
100%. 100%. And that's the joy of Spader. And final Spader things that I found out today just watching interviews. And I posted a video on both Twitter and Facebook. Spader in an interview about 2 Days in the Valley with a Texan reporter, an older lady Texan reporter, and she's uploaded all her videos on YouTube. So often when you look up sort of archival video interviews, her stuff comes up. In this interview with him and Charlize Theron from 2 Days in the Valley, and he's just sat there loosely against a couch with his legs like brushing against Theron. And occasionally like paws at her and purrs and whatever. He admits that when she's like, "What would you be doing if you weren't an actor?" He was like, "Fireworks. I like fireworks." Then he goes on to say, and he goes, "No, I really like fireworks. I'll really go anywhere to see a good firework display." And then he goes, "But it's sort of a family business, and those families really have the monopoly on firework display, so it'd be difficult to break into." And he says it with a completely straight face, and I'm like, either that is one of the greatest, weirdest improvs of all time, or he's genuinely looked into starting a fireworks business only to find the five, high families of firework displays have edged him out because they monopolize. You know what I mean? He's like, "Oh, maybe I'll do a firework display at the next rap party or whatever," only to find curses. The Rogers family of Iowa, who have a large firework display business, have yet again come in and stolen this opportunity from me. And then they ask, then they say to Theron, who's ignored. She gets asked a question at the beginning and then ignored for the rest of the interview, which is very insulting. But towards the end, the interviewer suggests that Theron could go into business with Spader doing fireworks, which, considering 2 Days in the Valley was her debut movie, I don't think she thought, "I'll do this movie and then I'll go off and join a traveling fireworks troupe with Spader." So that's glorious that Spader won. The other thing I found out is that the first season of Blacklist, right, when he was playing Reddington, apparently they had to completely organize and change the script of one of the episodes in the first series, because when Spader got hired and came on board, he literally went into the writer's room and went, by the way, when my character isn't working with the FBI, I think he would spend a lot of time hanging out in synagogues. So if you could put that in, that would be great. And that was his artistic note about Raymond Reddington, who is, a wanted terrorist and spy and whatever, is that when not working on international espionage and terrorism, he would be hanging around a lot in synagogues. Didn't go into any more detail than that. But that's so hanging around synagogues and fireworks. And this is what I mean about Spader. It's never. It's never, I own a busload of dildos. Like, it's never anything obvious. Yeah. It's, I like fireworks, right? Yeah. And he doesn't go on to say this, but he probably would, I like how the rockets penetrate the sky's innocence and explode fire flowers across the sky. You know what I mean? Like, he would find a way to make fireworks, an innocent childhood pastime of watching fireworks, he would find a way to make it incredibly sexual.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the penetrative rocket shooting into space, ejaculating light across, you know what I mean? Like he would find a way to just make fireworks just incredibly sexual. And again, hanging around synagogues, right? He doesn't go into any detail, but there's something there. The idea of a portly, because he's, fat now, portly, behatted, tiny hipster scarf wearing Spader hanging around synagogues, rubbing his waistcoated belly and just like licking his pursed lips is just obscene. Like, why is he in a synagogue? Why is he wearing a trilby? Why is he portly and happily rubbing his belly? Like, it's all obscene, yet none of it comes straight. Like, it's not, I think he would hang around sex shops or hang around strip joints or whatever. It's he hangs around synagogues, you know what I mean? Dressed obscenely and rubbing his belly. Like, he finds a way. That's what I'm saying. Right. So that's the essence to Sleazy Spader is not, cocks and things. It's fireworks and synagogues.
No, it's a great. I mean, it's so. I mean, just a quick with that whole thing with the fireworks thing. A friend of mine went to a private school in New Hampshire for a short period, and they used to have this show in New Hampshire called Granite State Challenge, where the high schools would compete in this trivia thing. And of course, at the beginning, they'd ask the kids about themselves. And I guess there was a film of when their school was on the show. They asked them kind of, what do you like to do? And their answers were, the first one said, my family doesn't know this, but I have a secret chicken farm in the backyard. And then the second one said, I dabbled in flamethrower repair. Right. And so it's almost like Spader, these kids have the Spader energy. And I wonder where it goes. Like, because I wonder what happened to those two kids who did that. I mean, they would have been older. They probably would be in their close to 50 now. Right. But where, how do you not, because what do you do with that energy if you're not Spader and you've been born in this life, in this world where you're in, a celebrity, you have an outlet for it.
Your way around the world, just in linen suits,
right? And just say these things. Like, he's got an outlet for it all. It's like he doesn't have to keep this to himself. Like, he can just say synagogues, and they have to accept it because it's
they have to.
We need Spader on this show. We have to. I don't know, humor is the right word, but
No, but you've got to think to yourself that, like, yes, he's testing them. Yes, it's probably a joke, right? Right. But the fact that they are forced to obey his every whim, no matter how ludicrous, is arousing him no end. I mean, he is so turned on by the fact that he can flounce his way into a writer's room, say the word hanging around synagogues, and then flounce out. The fact that they're all now, well, what the fuck do we do with that? Right. Right? How the fuck do we write that into this, 45-minute charming, ABC nightly show, NBC nightly show, whatever it is, NBC nightly show that families can watch, whatever. Like, how do we figure this shit out, right? Right. And he's just gone off to his trailer and is pleasuring himself to a fistful of bimbos, because he's like... imagine that. He's probably looking at Fistful of Bimbos and going, I demand this to be a prop on every set that I'm on. Right. And people probably scratch their head, well, how do we write that into Boston Legal or whatever? He's like, that's not my job. Right. My job is to bring you a fistful of bimbos and demand you figure out how to put it in my show. My job is not to explain why Reddington is in synagogues. My job is to tell you that that's exactly where he is. That's exactly, by the way, where I'll be, and you won't be able to find me anywhere else. And you have to write it into the show, or I am taking my portly gut and my trilby hat elsewhere, where they will entertain my insane whims.
It's a fascinating thing when you consider who Spader is, right? That, like, you think of Jim Belushi, who gets his own sitcom in like the early 2000s, and in that case, it was almost like Belushi, like, finding a way to mainstream himself, right? That like he's, you know, the doughy kind
he's
of
like,
affable.
I've tried everything. I did SNL. I tried to follow in the footsteps of my brother. I tried to do Oliver Stone films. I tried to do a lovable film with a dog. Like, how do I mainstream myself? I love the idea of Belushi mainstreaming himself.
Exactly. Well, because I think he needed a regular paycheck, and here he finally gets a regular paycheck. Whereas like Spader, the fact that Spader, I was just looking at it on his IMDb bio, he had 101 episodes of Boston Legal, and then 209 of this Blacklist show.
Yeah.
So somehow he was able to bend the TV industry to him for
whim.
310 episodes.
Yeah.
And the TV became this thing in the 2000s and into, you know, now the show, the Blacklist show, it sounds like it's still on the air. Like he's still doing this show. Like the fact that TV needed Spader that much, that they bent to him. You know, it's not like Belushi where they're like, we need a boomer, less offensive, less scary version of Kevin James. Can you do that for us?
Well, but he was like, Belushi's sitcom was like before Kevin James was a thing, right? It was before King of Queens.
Right after. So King of Queens was taking off, and I think they wanted a safer, less Gen X version of King of Queens, and that's where Belushi came in. Yeah,
according
exactly.
To Jim, was that late? I thought according to Jim,
2001,
was like
2002. Yeah, so it's like. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Because I've watched it and I'm like, oh, this is just a male Roseanne ripoff, and it's not even a good one. I thought it was 90s.
No, because again, because it was like one of those things where 2001 was the first episode. So King of Queens had been around for a little bit, but you know, this idea of having these doughy dads, these doughy, you know, affable.
How long did, according to Jim, didn't it run like 8 seasons or something?
8 seasons, yes, yeah.
8 seasons. I mean, we like. Like Belushi. Belushi couldn't get arrested, but he got 8 seasons of nobody cared about Belushi. No, he tried everything. He tried Schwarzenegger. He tried Oliver Stone. He tried Lovable Dog. He tried
the Tupac Shakur movie.
Shakur, right? He tried to break every possible audience group,
right?
And finally found public acceptance with a sitcom that, to my knowledge, is not running anywhere. It's not like you can stream, according to Jim, but it was just so popular at its time. Yeah. But you also have to say to yourself, like, Seinfeld's been and gone, Friends has been and gone, like some of these sitcoms that redefined the genre, and America was still so I don't know, schlubby dads trying to find the remote control. Is that still a thing we can write about? And I'm like, really? Didn't we do all the schlubby dad shows in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? Really? And we need Jim Belushi, and occasionally Dan Aykroyd will cameo, and they'll sing a blues song in a bar, and everyone will just be like, that's fine. Jim Belushi is both the schlubby dad on his show and the real Jim Belushi that sings blues with his fat old Canadian friend. What? That was a thing? What?
Right, because the thing was with King of Queens, right? So King of Queens comes out, in the late 90s. And I mean, Kevin James is a little bit older than Gen X, but the show has this very firm, New York Gen X sensibility to it. And I think there was this fear of the middle of the country doesn't relate to Kevin James. How can we do a middle of the country Kevin James? And that's where, Belushi, it's oh, hey, why don't we try Belushi for this? And it worked, right? It worked. And then for Belushi, it's he gets a regular paycheck, which you can't blame him for that.
Right.
But and I don't know to what extent now, but I think that's nowadays, right, that kind of thing, they wouldn't make a Belushi show out of it. What they would do is just be let's do, Masked Singer or something like that, some variety show thing.
It would all be reality TV now, which is what he's doing. He's doing Growing Belushi, which is his Pop Farm reality TV show. And it's on Discovery, so I think it's on Discovery, is Growing Belushi. The fact that he's not only that, but he showed up in the reboot of Twin Peaks.
Right.
Belushi. There's no listen. I love Belushi. I'm not, and everyone's like, oh, you know what? But when Max launches on May 25th or whenever Max launches, the Growing Belushi better be on there. It's a Discovery show, and I want to watch him. And again, the few clips that he shows on his social media is fucking around with his cousin, being oh, give me back my sweater. No, I won't give you back my sweater.
Right.
I'm like, this is a TV show? Belushi and his cousin arguing over a sweater? Like, what world are we living in? But it's kind of beautiful. It's kind of wonderful. And when we're done with Spader, you and I need to delve into the world of Belushi.
Yes, for sure. Because it's funny with Belushi. So I was on the Exploding Helicopter podcast where we talked about Royce. He had me on to talk about Royce. And we were both kind of shocked as we were talking about it, that we're like, hey, we actually like Belushi.
Right.
And I kind of went into that whole thing about the sort of the America's reckoning with the doughy white TV
guy,
dad.
right.
That like in the late 2000s, we'd had enough of it, and that's it. And so we kind of put Belushi in that box, right? When you look at his 90s stuff, he's like doing all kinds of different things. And we were like, man, like he's very, he has a lot of range as an actor. He can do a lot of things. And we were like, we actually like Belushi. We didn't realize it. And it kind of came at the same time that you were doing some of the stuff on YouTube with the Canine sequels.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like kind of that same idea. There's almost like this polygenesis of like rediscovering Belushi,
Right.
It's a fascinating thing because in the 90s, we took it for granted that Belushi would do anything, right? That he'd be in a movie with Tupac, he'd be in an erotic thriller, he would do a goofy American version of James Bond.
We are doing a Belushi series. That's it.
Yes.
It has to be done. We're doing a Belushi series. Next time you're on the show, we're going to do 90s Belushi, right?
Yes,
so we're going to do Separate Lives with Linda Hamilton. We're going to do Traces of Red.
Oh, we've got to do that one. Yes.
Yeah, we're going to do. Sadly, you've done Royce. So.
Yeah.
We years and years and years ago, we rented Royce. Years ago, when we were Belushi, because we loved Real Men and K9 and whatever. And our friends were, my friends and I were big Belushi fans back in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
And we rented Royce and we enjoyed it. Like, it's possible action film up until, but it was the bit on the train at the end where Royce is climbing up the train and the kid leans out and goes, Royce, and gives the game away, right? That made us go, fuck this movie. We fucking hate this. Like, fuck everything about this movie.
Right.
Because Royce was about to get the jump on him, and the only thing the writers could come up with was the kid was dumb enough to scream Royce's name at the climax, right?
Right.
So, but I've never gone back and seen it again, ever. I've never watched it again because I just remember saying, fuck this movie because of the kid, right? Not because of Belushi, but the kid.
Right.
I was in the archive down in Bridgeport buying some VHS as I normally have, and I found Royce on VHS. And I'm like, I have to buy Royce on VHS. And what's funny is over the years, I've collected VHS films of films that I personally feel that they're all films that I watched or rented in the 80s or the 90s, right? They're all films that I don't consider great at all. They're not films that I would consider like even K9 or whatever, or Real Men. But they're all films that I refuse to let die. Like, I want to know that they have a life out there. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a Michael Winner film called Bullseye with Roger Moore and Michael Caine, and no matter which way you slice it, as much as you want to like it, it's awful. Like, it's just so bad, and you're like, I don't know how Michael Caine, Roger Moore, and Michael Winner could have made such a bad movie, but it's so bad. But I don't want to let Bullseye die. Like, I can never let it die. It needs to exist somewhere in the world. The idea that Bullseye fades into the background, I will not let that happen. There's something about it that, I'm not going to call Winner a master of British cinema, but Caine and Moore are definitely masters of British cinema, right?
Yeah.
That at some point, two masters of British cinema and a passable British exploitation director got together and made a movie that was so bad that you have to just, like, your jaw just has to be on the floor while you watch it. But there's something about it, because I rented it back in the day, because I was like 12 when I first saw it or whatever, and because it had a certain like innate charm to me back when I was a child.
Right.
I need, like, if someone's like, your house is burning down, what would you run in and grab, right? Outside of my dogs, obviously, and my wife and everything else, but whatever. If there's movies, right, what movies do you run in and grab, right? And you go, well, I suppose I could run in and grab my special edition 5-disc box set of Dawn of the Dead with all the blah, blah, blah. Well, no, I'll always be able to buy Dawn of the Dead, right? Dawn of the Dead will always be out in the world. It's now a renowned
it's not even a cult film anymore. It's like a renowned quintessential film, right? And yes, it would cost me a lot of money to rebuy the box set that I have that's all shiny and lovely. But no, I would run in and save the VHS of Royce. I would save the VHS of Burt Reynolds' Malone. I would save the VHS of Bullseye. I would save, you know what I mean? Like, I would save Hamburger the motion picture, right? There are certain... I would save Splits. You know, there are certain films that I'm like, they can't get lost. You know what I mean? Like, other films will never get lost, and we're thankful for it. But no one's, with the best will in the world, Vinegar Syndrome is not like, let's put Bullseye.
Right. Yes.
No boutique. Shout Factory isn't like, we should do a Belushi series. Like, no one's saying that. You know what I mean? No one's saving Traces of Red but me.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm saving it. And there's something beautiful about that. So, Matt, that tees up the fact that next time you'll be on this podcast, we'll be talking Belushi. And not only that, but the rich vein of bizarre, genre-hopping 90s Belushi.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. People are going to be like, what the fuck are these movies and where did they find them? And that's what this is all about, Matt. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Because there are a lot of people. What I've tried to resist with this podcast is, he likes B movies and exploitation films, so that's what we're going to cover. I do like B movies and exploitation films. I do like horror. I do like genre films. I like action. I like whatever. And we've certainly covered our fair share of those films, right? But no other podcast that I know about is talking about Donald Pleasance, James Spader, Jim Belushi. Like those... You know what I mean? No one else is talking about those. I feel compelled to keep them alive. So that's what I'm doing. And that's what we'll continue to do here on the After Movie Diner. Matt, it has been a complete pleasure talking to you yesterday and today. I will try and edit this together by Thursday to put it out into the world. But thank you very much. And you are welcome back anytime to Belushi your way through the 90s.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And yeah, we got to get you on my show as well at some point too. So we'll work that out for sure.
Yes. We've come to the end of the show. That wasn't so bad, was it? You can move forward now with the confidence that you are a survivor. To play us out, here's some new music by Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, which you can find on Bandcamp, Spotify, and wherever music is found. Even TikTok, which we don't understand. We're old and find your childish, vain pursuits confusing. Good night.
Wake up with no fixed agenda. Happy in the place you made. Yeah. When defiance looks like surrender, and all the battles have been delayed. Break away all parts of winter, 'cause there is new life underneath. Yeah. When all your soul appears to splinter, but your time out there was brief. Make it a better day for someone. Do one small thing that clears the air. Quiet conversation can heal this whole ball. Just show a stranger that you care. Fight the urge to go the wrong direction. Plot a course and see it through. Make love the only thing that matters. Yeah. And it will come on back to you. know there is no second drive. Story. Find a home that's on your side. Yeah, lift everyone else around you. Welcome the rolling of the tide. Let it roll, let it roll, let it roll. Make it a better day for someone. Small thing that clears the air. Quiet conversation can heal this whole world. Just show a stranger that you care. Show him that you care. Make it a better day for someone. Do one small thing that makes them laugh. The simple can clear mountains of complexity. Ah, baby, just know there is no second drive. There is no second drive. Wake up with no fixed agenda. Just happy in the place you made. When defiance looks like surrender. And all the battles have been delayed.